Lord should spank you a little bit or correct you, it's for your own good. It's because He loves you and wants you to be good and obey, so He can reward you with all of His wonderful blessings. Praise the Lord.
And so that's the story of the 3 little accidents and how Jesus loved us enough to spank us.
Cult members could be teachers, neighbors, and anyone you know. Report any odd behaviors to
And now we all worship our King. Our King. Our King. His name is Malcolm. He is the King of Love.
We must feed him.
We must feed him gravel.
Or he becomes angry. And this is your chance to start anew. And all we're asking you to do
is change your name
and clean your brain. Forget about anything you ever knew.
And your heart will vanish home.
And our love will never go.
Now wear this ring
and join the King.
And you will never be alone.
Alright, you read the title of the video. You already know what we're doing today. We're going to be looking at this sweet little iceberg, the cult iceberg. And before we embark on this journey, let's kind of understand together what cults actually are. So first of all, cults are social groups characterized by their devotion to a particular ideology, belief system, or charismatic leader. And they're often veiled in secrecy as they can exert significant influence over their members, dictating everything from their behavior to their own thoughts. Some cults operate on the fringes of society, while others have gained tons of notoriety for their extreme practices and manipulative tactics. So let's go ahead and navigate the layers of this cult iceberg and uncover some of the stories, beliefs, and mysteries that lie beneath the surface, and let's jump right into it. Alright, so we're starting off in tier 1, and first off we have cargo cults. And cargo cults are defined as a fascinating anthropological phenomenon that emerged in the context of interactions between indigenous peoples and Western cultures, particularly during the 20th century. These cults mainly originated in Melanesia, which is a region in the southwestern Pacific Ocean encompassing countries like Papua New Guinea, Fiji, Vanuatu, and others. Now the term cargo cult itself stems from the belief held by these indigenous groups that certain rituals and practices could attract material wealth known as cargo from the Western world. The cargo was often seen as miraculous and could include manufactured goods, food, and other resources that were not traditionally available to these communities. Now, these cults typically arose following encounters with Westerners such as missionaries, traders, or military personnel who brought with them advanced technology, goods, and a vastly different way of life. This sudden appearance of airplanes, radios, clothing, and other modern items sparked awe and curiosity among the indigenous populations, leading them to develop rituals and ceremonies in an attempt to replicate the arrival of these goods. These rituals often involved building mock airstrips, control towers, and aircraft out of local materials, along with mimicking the actions of foreigners such as dressing in uniforms or waving makeshift flags. The belief was that by performing these rituals, they could summon airplanes carrying valuable cargo to their communities. Now, a lot of these cults still exist, and they are continued to be studied by anthropologists and historians as a fascinating example of the intersection between tradition and globalization. Alright, next up we have the Children of God. And the Children of God, or the Family International, is an American new religious movement founded in 1968 by David Brandt Berg. The group has gone under a number of different names since its inception, including Teens for Christ, the Children of God, the Family of Love, or simply the Family. According to the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, at its height, the family movement had tens of thousands of members, including River and Joaquin Phoenix, Rose McGowan, and Jeremy Spencer. They initially spread a message of salvation, apocalypticism, spiritual revolution and happiness, and distrust of the outside world, which members called the system. Like other fundamentalist groups, it foretold the coming of a dictator called the Antichrist, the rise of a brutal one-world government, and its eventual overthrow by Jesus Christ in the Second Coming. The founder and prophetic leader, David Berg, gave himself the titles of King, the Last End-Time Prophet, Moses, and David. He would communicate with his followers via Mo letters until his death in 1994, and after his death, his widow, Karen Zerby, became the leader of the new cult, taking the titles Queen and Prophetess. she would marry Steve Kelly, and he would take the title of King Peter and became the face of the family, speaking in public more often than Berg or Zerbe. Now, there's a lot of controversy surrounding this cult, like many others, as they introduced a method called flirty fishing, which encouraged female members to show God's love through sexual relationships with potential converts. And this led to many allegations of child sexual abuse made by past members. Ex-members have accused the family's leadership of following a policy of lying to outsiders and being steeped in a history of sexual deviance and even meddling in third world politics. And at least one individual growing up in the family during the Children of God era described being sexually abused by members of the cult, including her own father, blaming the philosophy of David Berg, who told the members that, quote, God was love and love was sex, so sex should not be limited by age or relationship. Now, this cult still exists today. They've come up with this thing called the Love Charter that is a governing document that entails each member's rights, responsibilities, and requirements. And yeah, they basically believe that they are the soldiers in the spiritual war of good versus evil for the souls of hearts and men. Alright, our next cult is Heaven's Gate, and this was an American new religious movement known primarily for the mass suicide committed by its members in 1997. Commonly designated as a cult, it was founded in 1974 and led by Bonnie Nettles and Marshall Applewhite, known within the movement as T and Do. The two first met in 1972 and went on a journey of spiritual discovery, discovering themselves as the two witnesses of revelation, attracting a following of several hundred people in the mid-1970s. Scholars have described the theology of Heaven's Gate as a mixture of Christian millenarianism, New Age, and UFOlogy, and as such, it has been characterized as a UFO religion. The central belief of the group was that the followers could transform themselves into immortal extraterrestrial beings by rejecting their human nature, and they would ascend to heaven, referred to as the next level, or the next evolutionary level above human. However, the death of Bonnie Nettles from cancer in 1985 had challenged the group's views on ascension. Where they originally believed that they would ascend to heaven while alive aboard a UFO, they later came to believe that the body was merely a container or vehicle for the soul, and that their consciousness would be transferred to the new next level bodies upon death. In 1996, the group rented a large house, which they called the monastery, and through the next year, Marshall Applewhite would tape himself in Doe's Final Exit, speaking of mass suicide and the only way to evacuate Earth. After asserting that Comet Hale-Bopp was a sign that the group had been looking for, as well as speculation that a UFO may have been trailing the comet, Applewhite and his 38 followers prepared for rituals so that their souls could reach the next level before the closure of Heaven's Gate. Members believed that after their deaths, a UFO would take their souls to this other level of existence above human, which Applewhite described as being both physical and spiritual, and their preparations included each member videotaping a farewell message. They took phenobarbital mixed with applesauce or pudding and washed it down with vodka. After ingesting this mix, they secured plastic bags around their head to induce asphyxiation, and all 39 members were dressed in identical black shirts and sweatpants, and brand new black and white Nike Decades athletic shoes, and armband patches reading Heaven's Gate Away Team. The 39 people, including 21 women and 18 men between the ages of 26 and 72, are all believed to have died in 3 groups over 3 successive days, with the remaining participants cleaning up after each prior group's deaths. The Heaven's Gate deaths were widely publicized in the media as an example of mass suicide, and when the news broke, former members of Heaven's Gate died by suicide in the months following the mass suicide. Although most people consider the event a mass suicide, sociologist and former member of the cult has referred to the event as a murder. And as of 2017, there has been no evident growth, as after the mass suicide, the group fell into obscurity, relying mainly on their website for recruitment. Alright, next up we have the Jonestown Cult, or People's Temple. And this cult, officially known as the People's Temple Agricultural Project, was a religious group founded by Jim Jones in the 1950s. He was a charismatic preacher who initially gained a following in Indiana, United States, before relocating the group to California in the 1960s. The People's Temple blended elements of Christianity with socialist and progressive ideals, advocating for racial integration, social justice, and communal living. Jim Jones, the leader of the People's Temple, espoused a belief in social equality and the creation of a utopian society free of racism, poverty, and oppression, and he would portray himself as a messiah figure, claiming to have divine powers, and presenting the People's Temple as a refuge for injustices from the outside world. As the group grew, Jim Jones would exert his increasing control over its members, employing manipulation, coercion, and psychological tactics to maintain loyalty and obedience. He would isolate followers from their family and subjected them to intense indoctrination sessions aimed at reinforcing his authority and the group's beliefs. In 1974, amidst mounting scrutiny and legal troubles in the United States, Jim Jones would move the People's Temple to Guyana, South America, where he established an agricultural commune called Jonestown. The remote location was intended to serve as a haven from perceived persecution and to facilitate the realization of Jones's vision of a utopian society. However, life in Jonestown quickly devolved into a nightmare of exploitation, abuse, and paranoia. Jones wielded absolute control over the community, dictating every aspect of the members' lives, including their work, relationships, and even their thoughts. Dissent was met with punishment, and those who attempted to leave or criticize Jones were subjected to psychological manipulation or physical violence. Now, this all led up to the downfall of the People's Temple that culminated in tragedy on November 18th, 1978, when Jim Jones ordered a mass suicide and murder at Jonestown. In an event that shocked the world, over 900 members of the cult, including men, women, and children, ingested cyanide-laced Kool-Aid under Jones's direction. Some willingly participated, while others were coerced and forced into compliance by armed guards. Now, this massacre remains one of the largest incidents of mass in modern history and serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers of unchecked charismatic leadership, cult manipulation, and the consequences of blind obedience. And the tragedy itself prompted widespread scrutiny of cults and led to reforms in laws governing religious organizations and the protection of individuals from exploitation and abuse. Alright, next up we got the Ku Klux Klan. And this is a white supremacist hate group that has operated primarily in the United States since the Construction era following the Civil War. The KKK's beliefs are rooted in racism, bigotry, and white nationalism, advocating for supremacy of the white race and the exclusion, oppression, and violence against racial and religious minorities, particularly African Americans, Jews, Catholics, and immigrants. The origins of the Ku Klux Klan trace back to the post-Civil War South, where it emerged as a clandestine organization aimed at resisting Reconstruction efforts and maintaining white supremacy. The Klan used intimidation, violence, and terror tactics, including lynching, arson, and assault to terrorize African Americans and suppress their civil rights. They would wear white robes and hoods to conceal their identities while carrying out their acts of violence and intimidation. Now, their ideology revolves around the belief in the inherent superiority of the white race and the preservation of a racially homogenous society. They view racial integration, civil rights, and diversity as threats to their perceived dominance and seek to maintain social and political power through fear and intimidation. While the Klan has gone through multiple iterations and periods of decline and resurgence throughout its history, it continues to exist in various forms today. Modern iterations of the KKK often operate in smaller, decentralized groups or as a part of a broader white supremacist movement. Some factions have adopted a veneer of legitimacy by engaging in political activism or community outreach while still promoting their hateful ideology. And despite efforts to combat hate groups like the KKK through legislation, law enforcement, and social activism, they continue to pose a threat to marginalized communities and contribute to racial tensions and violence. And incidents of Klan-related violence, hate crimes, and expressions of white supremacist ideology still persist in the United States, underscoring the ongoing challenge of confronting and eradicating bigotry and hate. Alright, next up we have the Manson family, and the Manson family, or Manson cult, refers to the followers of Charles Manson, a notorious American cult leader who gained infamy in the late 1960s. This group was not a traditional cult in sense of religious worship or ideology, but rather a collection of individuals drawn to Manson's charismatic personality and his apocalyptic worldview. Charles Manson espoused a bizarre and twisted philosophy that combined the elements of racism, paranoia, and belief in an impending race war he called Helter Skelter. He believed that a cataclysmic race war would erupt between whites and African Americans, leading to the collapse of society. And according to Manson, his followers would emerge as the chosen ones to lead humanity after the dust settled. When it comes to his followers, Manson exerted total control over them, employing manipulation, psychological coercion, and drug-induced mind control to maintain a hold on them. He fostered a cult-like atmosphere of obedience and devotion, convincing his followers to commit acts of violence and murder on his behalf. Now, the most infamous and shocking crime associated with the Manson family is the Tate LaBianca murders in August of 1969, whereby under Manson's orders, a group of his followers brutally murdered actress Sharon Tate and 4 others at her home in Los Angeles. The following night, they carried out similar murders of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, and the gruesome nature of these crimes shocked the nation and marked Manson and his followers as symbols of senseless violence and depravity. After the arrests and trials of Manson and his followers, the Manson family gradually disbanded. Manson and several of his followers were convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, and Manson himself would die in prison in 2017. Some former members of the Manson family have since renounced their involvement with the group and have attempted to reintegrate into society, while others remain loyal to Manson's memory and beliefs. Like many other of these cults, the legacy continues to fascinate and horrify people to this day, and serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of charismatic leaders and the susceptibility of individuals to manipulation and coercion. Alright, next up we have Scientology, and Scientology is a controversial religious movement founded in the 1950s by science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard. The central beliefs and practices of Scientology are rooted in Hubbard's teachings, which center around the concept of spiritual enlightenment and personal development through a process known as auditing. According to the Scientology doctrine, individuals are spiritual beings called Thetans who have forgotten their nature. Through auditing sessions conducted with an e-meter, which is a device used to measure a mental state, adherents seek to rid themselves of negative emotions and traumas known as engrams that inhibit spiritual growth. As members progress through auditing levels, they aim to achieve a state of spiritual awareness and freedom from the constraints of the physical world. Scientologists also believe in the existence of extraterrestrial beings called body Thetans, which are said to inhabit individuals and hinder their spiritual progress. The ultimate goal of Scientology is to attain a state of spiritual enlightenment and personal fulfillment known as the, quote, operating Thetan. Now, the leadership of the Church of Scientology is centralized around the figure of L. Ron Hubbard, who is regarded as the founder and source of Scientology's teachings. And following his death in 1986, David Miscavige assumed leadership of the church as its chairman of the board. Now, Scientology has faced widespread criticism and controversy since its inception, as critics accuse the organization of being a cult that employs coercive tactics including harassment, intimidation, and legal action against former members and critics. Scientology's secretive nature, strict hierarchical structure, and aggressive response to dissent have also contributed to its reputation as a controversial and authoritarian organization. Over the years, numerous allegations of abuse, exploitation, and human rights violations have been leveled against Scientology, including claims of forced labor, psychological manipulation, and financial exploitation. The organization has also been involved in numerous legal battles with governments, media outlets, and individuals critical of its practices. Despite facing criticism and controversy, Scientology continues to operate as a global religious movement with a significant presence in countries around the world. And I mean, hell, Tom Cruise is a Scientologist. And if you want to know something funny about it and didn't really know this before, South Park did a really, really funny episode on Scientology and pretty much broke down their whole belief system and basically said, yeah, we did that, sue us at the end of the episode. Pretty funny. Alright, next up we have the Pythagoreans, and the Pythagoreans were followers of the ancient Greek philosopher and mathematician Pythagoras, who lived in the 6th century BCE. While the term cult may not be entirely accurate in the modern sense, Pythagoreanism had many characteristics of what we might consider a philosophical or religious movement. Pythagoras and his followers believed in a broad range of teachings encompassing mathematics, philosophy, religion, and ethics, and some of the key beliefs included numerology and mathematics, philosophy, metaphysics, and an ethical living. The Pythagoreans ended up forming a community or school where they lived and studied together, sharing their philosophical and mathematical insights, and Pythagoras himself was a revered teacher and spiritual leader by his followers. In terms of historical impact, the Pythagoreans played a significant role in the development of Western philosophy and mathematics, and Pythagorean ideas later influenced later philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle, and laid the groundwork for the rational and scientific inquiry that would characterize ancient Greek thought. As for their present-day status, however, the Pythagoreans as a formal group or organization no longer exist. However, their philosophical and mathematical legacy continues to influence modern thought and academia. Mathematicians still study the Pythagorean theorem, and I'm like 90% sure you've had to fucking do that bullshit too. And philosophers also explore the ethical and metaphysical ideas associated with Pythagoreanism. While they may not be considered a cult in contemporary sense, the Pythagoreans left an enduring mark on Western intellectual history. Alright, next up we have various cults of personality. And cults of personality refer to the phenomenon where an individual, typically a political leader or public figure, cultivates an exaggerated and often worshipful public image. These individuals often foster intense loyalty and devotion among their followers, who may idolize them to the point of adulation and unquestioning obedience. Cults of personality are characterized by the elevation of the leader's persona above criticism or scrutiny, often resulting in a cult-like following. Throughout human history, monarchs and other heads of state were frequently treated with enormous reverence, and they were also thought to be endowed with superhuman qualities. Through the principle of the, quote, divine right of kings, notably in medieval Europe, rulers were said to hold office by the will of God or the will of the gods. Ancient Egypt, Imperial Japan, the Inca, the Aztecs, Tibet, Siam, and the Roman Empire are especially noted for their redefinition of monarchs as god kings. However, the spread of democratic and secular ideas in Europe and North America in the 18th and 19th centuries made it increasingly difficult for monarchs to preserve this aura. And while examples of these are often associated with totalitarian regimes, they can also emerge in democratic societies and within non-political contexts. For example, certain religious leaders, celebrities, and business tycoons may cultivate cults of personality around themselves, attracting devoted followers who idolize and emulate them. Alright, next up we have the Buddhafield cult, and Buddhafield is a cult in the United States that began in the 1980s in Hollywood and continues in Hawaii today, often recruiting through yoga studios. The group has been described as a cult by the former members, and the leader of the Buddhafield cult is a man previously known as Michael Andreas. The beliefs of the cult largely promote New Age ideas, and the leader thinks of himself as God and encourages his followers to think of themselves as God as well. Buddhafield uses the Sanskrit word Shakti, meaning power, for Andreas' alleged power transference to his followers using his finger. Andreas demanded his followers remain celibate despite himself having sexual intercourse with various followers, and drugs and alcohol were also banned from use while in the group. Buddhafield followers also changed names while in the group, and to add to this increased paranoia after the Waco siege, Andreas left his followers for 6 months to find a new location for the group. He also began to undergo increasing amounts of plastic surgery around this time, as well as recommending his female followers undergo similar procedures. And he also attempted to get followers to start reporting on each other for perceived transgressions. Now, since the cult's beginning, many allegations have been made against Andreas, most notably sexual abuse to his male followers, and his victims have also said that they've had their confessions in their weekly hypnotherapy sessions used against them. Now, the leader is still alive today, and yeah, they mostly operate in Hawaii, so if you want to go join up, yeah, you know where to go. Alright, next up we have the Westboro Baptists. And the Westboro Baptist, or the Westboro Baptist Church, is a small, highly controversial religious group based in Topeka, Kansas, in the United States. They're not affiliated with any mainstream Baptist denomination and is widely considered to be a hate group due to its extreme beliefs and tactics. The beliefs of the Westboro Baptist Church are rooted in a virulent form of Calvinist theology that emphasizes predestination and the belief that God's wrath is directed towards those who engage in perceived sins, particularly homosexuality. They believe that America and the world are morally corrupt and that disasters and tragedies are manifestations of God's punishment for society's acceptance of homosexuality and other perceived sins. Their leader was Fred Phelps, who served as the group's pastor until his death in 2014. And after his death, his daughter Shirley Phelps Roper emerged as one of the prominent leaders of the group. The church is infamous for its highly publicized and inflammatory protests at various events, including military funerals, LGBT pride parades, and concerts. Members of this church often carry signs with slogans such as "Thank God for Dead Soldiers," expressing their extreme views on homosexuality, the military, and other social issues. Their protests and actions have since sparked a widespread condemnation and outrage from across the political and religious spectrum, and their tactics have been widely criticized as hateful, insensitive, and disrespectful, particularly towards grieving families and communities. However, despite facing legal challenges and public backlash, the Westboro Baptist Church continues to operate and engage in its controversial activities. and the group remains relatively small in size and influence, consisting mainly of members of the extended Phelps family and a few others. Alright, next up we have Jehovah's Witnesses, and Jehovah's Witnesses is a form of restorist Christian denomination. The denomination is directed by a group of elders known as the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, which establishes all doctrines. They believe that the destruction of the present world system at Armageddon is imminent, and the establishment of God's kingdom over the earth is the only solution to all of humanity's problems. The group emerged in the United States from the Bible study movement founded in the late 1870s by Charles Taze Russell, who also co-founded the Zion's Watchtower Tract Society in 1881 to organize and print the movement's publications. A leadership dispute after Russell's death resulted in several groups breaking away, with Joseph Franklin Rutherford retaining control of the Watchtower Society and its properties, and Rutherford would end up making significant organizational and doctrinal changes, including adoption of the name Jehovah's Witnesses in 1931 to distinguish the group from other Bible student groups and symbolize a break within the legacy of Russell traditions. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses are known for their door-to-door preaching, distributing literature such as The Watchtower and Awake, and for refusing military service and blood transfusions. They also consider the use of God's name vital for proper worship, and they reject Trinitarianism, inherent immortality of the soul, and hellfire, which they consider unscriptural doctrines. They do not observe Christmas, Easter, or birthdays or other holidays and customs they consider to have pagan origins incompatible with Christianity, and they prefer to use their own Bible translation called the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures. Witnesses commonly call their body of beliefs the truth and consider themselves to be in the truth, and they consider human society morally corrupt and under the influence of Satan, and most limit their social interaction with non-witnesses. Now, as I said before, the group is still heavily active today, and they have since been criticized regarding their biblical translation, doctrines, and coercion of its members. The Watchtower Society has made various unfulfilled predictions about major biblical events, such as Christ's second coming, the advent of God's kingdom, and Armageddon's, and their policies for handling cases of sexual abuse have been the subject of various formal inquiries, as the group has consistently been noted to fail to report abuse allegations to authorities, and our policy is that elders inform authorities when it is required by law to do so, but otherwise leave it up to the victim and their family. They've been accused of having policies and culture that help conceal cases of sexual abuse within the organization, and has been criticized for its two-witness rule for church discipline. They still continue to operate globally as a religious organization with millions of adherents worldwide, and they maintain an active presence in communities around the world and continue to engage in evangelism and outreach efforts. Alright, moving on to tier 2, let's go. Yeah. And first up we have Shinrikyo, and this is a Japanese religious cult founded in 1984 by Shoko Asahara, whose real name was Chizuo Matsumoto. Now, this group combined the elements of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Christianity with its own apocalyptic and doomsday beliefs, and Shinrikyo aimed to achieve spiritual enlightenment and salvation while also preparing for an impending global catastrophe. The cult believed in an imminent apocalypse that would result in the end of the world, and they predicted those including nuclear war, environmental collapse, and the arrival of a cosmic destroyer. The leader Asahara presented himself as a messiah figure with supernatural powers, claiming to be the reincarnation of Jesus Christ and Buddha, and he held absolute authority over the group and was worshipped by his followers. Now, Shinrikyo believed in the necessity of purifying the world through acts of violence and terrorism, and they viewed their actions as a means to hasten the apocalypse and bring about a new, purify the world order. They would gain international notoriety in 1995 when its members carried out a deadly sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway system. This attack killed 13 people and injured thousands, making it one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in Japan's history. The cult was also linked to other violent incidents, including the 1994 sarin gas attack on Matsumoto, Japan, which killed 8 people, and following the Tokyo subway attack, Japanese authorities launched a massive crackdown on Shinrikyo. resulting in the arrest and prosecution of its leaders and members. Shoko Asahara and several other high-ranking members were sentenced to death for their roles in the attacks, including other crimes, including murder and kidnapping. And in the following years of the crackdown, Aum Shinrikyo underwent significant internal turmoil and splintered into various factions. The group would eventually disband in 2000, and many of its remaining members renounced their allegiance to the cult. However, despite this dissolution of Aum Shinrikyo as an organization, the legacy continues to haunt Japan and the global community, as the Tokyo subway attack exposed the dangers posed by extremist religious groups and highlighted the vulnerability of societies to acts of terrorism. Alright, next up we have Jared Leto's cult, and basically, in 2019, Jared Leto and his band 30 Seconds to Mars started a cult. The band invited fans who called themselves the Echelon to a retreat in Croatia, where Jared Leto, dressed in white robes, hosted hundreds of his devotees for a 3-day music festival, complete with yoga and movie screenings. The band would tweet photos of Jared Leto leading hundreds of people, also dressed in white, while captioned, "Yes, this is a cult." Now, apparently all these fans actually paid money to be isolated on this island with Jared Leto and be indoctrinated into the cult. And while it doesn't seem like a traditional cult with a religious doctrine, it seems more like a personality cult with people obsessed with Jared Leto. Alright, next up we have NXIVM, and this was a controversial self-help organization that has been described as a cult. It was founded in the 1990s by Keith Rainier, who portrayed himself as a charismatic and visionary leader. NXIVM claimed to offer personal and professional development programs aimed at helping individuals achieve success and fulfillment in their lives. These tools offered included techniques for personal growth, empowerment, and success, as they conducted workshops and seminars focusing on topics such as leadership, communication, and overcoming personal obstacles. They operated on a hierarchical structure, with Keith Rainier at the top as the founder and leader, and various levels of leadership and membership beneath him. Members were also encouraged to recruit new participants and advance through the organization's ranks by participating in its programs and recruiting others. Now, NXIVM had very secretive elements, including an inner circle known as DOS, or Dominus Obsequious Sororium, which moonlighted as a women empowerment group, but was later revealed to be a secretive and coercive organization. Members of DOS were allegedly subjected to physical branding, emotional manipulation, and exploitation by Rainier and other high-ranking members. In 2017, investigations by journalists and law enforcement would reveal allegations of sexual abuse, exploitation, and manipulation within NXIVM, particularly involving Keith Rainier and other leaders. Former members had accused Rainier of using his position of power to coerce women into sexual relationships and engage in abusive practices. By March 2018, Keith Rainier was arrested and charged with multiple counts of sex trafficking, racketeering, and conspiracy. And subsequent investigations and legal proceedings uncovered further evidence of NXIVM's criminal activities and abuses. In June of 2019, Rainier was convicted on all counts, including sex trafficking, racketeering, and conspiracy, following a high-profile trial in federal court. And several other high-ranking members of NXIVM, including actress Allison Mack, also pleaded guilty to various charges related to their involvement within the organization. And as of today, NXIVM has been disbanded, and its leaders have been brought to justice. Alright, next up we have Order of the Solar Temple, and this was a secretive religious sect that emerged in the late 20th century, founded by Joseph de Mambro and Luc Jouret in Switzerland in the 1980s. The group blended elements of Christianity, New Age spirituality, and presenting itself as an esoteric order dedicated to spiritual enlightenment and preparation for the end of the world. The cult believed that there was an impending cosmic transformation or apocalypse, which they saw as an opportunity for spiritual ascension or transcendence to a higher plane of existence, and members were encouraged to prepare for this event through spiritual practices and rituals. The Order of the Solar Temple taught a belief in reincarnation and the cyclical nature of existence. They believed that members who died would be reborn into a higher state of consciousness or ascend to a higher spiritual realm. The two leaders were revered as spiritual leaders and messiah figures, and they held absolute authority over the cult's members and were believed to possess special insights and powers. They would gain notoriety in the 1990s due to a series of mass suicides and murders committed by its members. These tragic events unfolded in multiple locations, including Switzerland, Canada, and France, and resulted in the deaths of dozens of people, including children. In October of 1994, 48 members of the cult were found dead in 2 separate incidents in Switzerland and Canada. Many of the victims had been drugged and killed in what was appeared to be a coordinated mass suicide. And in December of the same year, another 16 members, including children, were found dead in a burnt-out chalet in the French Alps. The mass suicide and murders shocked the world and led to increased scrutiny of the Order of the Solar Temple and similar cults, and investigations revealed a pattern of manipulation, coercion, and psychological abuse within the group, as well as financial exploitation of its members. Now, by the 90s, the group would form a commune in Canada, and Joseph de Membro would summon all the members and followers and explain that the temple's mission was coming to an end and that the leaders would disappear on the star Sirius, and the remaining members would have to continue their work. Leaders then began to monitor members who said they wanted to leave OTS, and some were spied on, and others even had their phones tapped. By 1994, Joseph de Membro had entrusted special missions to his devoted close members, and several stages were organized after this transit to Sirius. And during the last meeting of the Order in September of 1994, the group was renamed as the Alliance Rose Croix, and claimed that the group renaming was in order to reach the irreversible stage of the return to the Father. On September 30th, 1994, OTS leader Dominique Belleton would lure the couple Antonio Dutas, who was a member of OTS and frequently spoke out against the leader's deceit and embezzlement, and his partner Suzanne Robinson, along with their 2-month-old baby Christopher Emmanuel, to de Membro's chalet in Canada. At this point, de Membro regarded the baby as the Antichrist, and he ordered the infant to be eliminated by 2 knights of the sect. De Membro believed that the Antichrist was born from these 2 to prevent him from succeeding in his spiritual aim, and the baby was stabbed through the heart with a wooden stake, and the parents were then murdered. 2 members would then remain behind at the chalet and set fire to it, killing themselves. Less than a week later, on October 4th, 1994, 2 fires would break out in Switzerland, one in Cherie and the other in Salvan. And when the fire department arrived, they found 23 people dead in Cherie and 25 in Salvan. The victims were, in most cases, dressed in a white, black, or gold ritual cloak, depending on the degree of initiation reached, and among the dead was the leader, Joseph de Membro, in addition to his wife and child. Now, many of these victims had been shot and asphyxiated, and in all of these incidents, the deaths were believed to be part of a coordinated plan orchestrated by the leaders to ascend to a higher plane of existence. The cult was effectively dismantled following these tragic events, and its leaders were either killed or arrested. Alright, next up we have Sobek's cult, and Sobek was an ancient Egyptian deity with a complex and elastic history in nature. He is associated with the Nile crocodiles or the West African crocodile, and is represented either in its form or as a human with a crocodile head. Sobek was also associated with power, fertility, and military prowess, but served additionally as a protective deity, with magic qualities invoked especially for protection against dangers presented in the Nile. Now at the time, the entire Fayum region, or the land of the lake in Egyptian, served as a cult center to this deity. Many Fayum towns developed their own localized versions of the god, and at the locations, mummified crocodiles were employed as cult images. Extensive building programs honoring Sobek were realized, and specialized priests functioned solely to serve Sobek, boasting titles like Prophet of the Crocodile Gods and one who buries of the bodies of the crocodile gods in the lands of the lake. And all this was done in association that Sobek was considered a protective deity, and his fierceness was able to ward off evil while simultaneously defending the innocent. Alright, next up we have Cianon, and this was initially founded in 1958 as a drug rehabilitation program by Charles E. Dederick Sr., and it began as a self-help group for individuals struggling with addiction, but evolved into a controversial organization with cult-like characteristics. It started with a belief in the therapeutic community model, emphasizing mutual support, honesty, and self-improvement, and members were encouraged to participate in group therapy sessions, adhere to strict rules, and confront each other's behavior openly. Over time, Cianon became increasingly authoritarian, with Chuck exerting control over members' lives. It developed cult-like characteristics, including enforced conformity, isolation from the outside world, and the promotion of Chuck as a messiah figure. Cianon would go on to implement controversial practices, including, quote, the game, which was a confrontational group therapy session where members would engage in verbal attacks and criticism. Physical violence was also used as a form of discipline, and members were encouraged to sever ties with non-members, including family and friends. They would eventually face legal scrutiny and controversy due to its practices, including allegations of abuse and violence, and in 1978, a CNN member would attempt to murder a lawyer critical of the organization by sending him a rattlesnake in the mail. This incident would bring increased attention and criticism to CNN, and by the 1980s, their reputation had deteriorated and the legal troubles had mounted. In 1980, it would lose its status as a tax-exempt charity, and in 1991, it declared bankruptcy. They would disband in the early 1990s, and Chuck would die in 1997. While CNN no longer exists as an organization, its legacy continues to be studied and debated, and some former members credit CNN with helping them overcome addiction and improve their lives, while others describe it as a destructive and abusive cult. Alright, next up we have the Final Fantasy House, and this is not really a cult in a traditional sense. Rather, it refers to a group of individuals who shared a house in the mid-2000s and became known for their obsessive fascination with Final Fantasy, particularly the online role-playing game Final Fantasy VII. The Final Fantasy House was a residence in Ohio, USA, where several young adults lived together, and the individuals in the house shared a deep passion for the Final Fantasy series, and their lives became deeply intertwined with the game's mythology and characters. The residents became deeply immersed in their fantasy world, eventually blurring the lines between fiction and reality, and they began to believe themselves to be reincarnations of characters from the game, such as Sephiroth, Cloud Strife, and other iconic figures. They engaged in elaborate role-playing scenarios, dressing in costumes, and even acting out scenes from the game. They became increasingly isolated from the outside world, preferring the company of fellow fans and their fantasy personas, and they cut ties with their friends and family, leading to further isolation and withdrawal. They would gain notoriety online after one of the former residents wrote a series of blog posts detailing their experiences living in the house, including people going as far as to put arousal pills in food to induce sexual favors, members being locked up in a soundproof room to the point of insanity so that they would remember their video game life, and a person being put in an ice cube bath to awaken their magic powers, along with other regular verbal abuse. The blog post described the residents' bizarre behaviors and beliefs, drawing attention from both fans and critics for the Final Fantasy series, and the individuals who lived in the house have since moved on with their lives, and the attention surrounding the Final Fantasy house has largely faded. Alright, next up we have the Sullivanians, and the Sullivanians were a controversial new religious movement that emerged in New York City in the 1970s. It was founded by psychologist Saul B. Newton, and the Sullivanians aimed to create a utopian community based on principles of communal living, radical therapy, and personal growth. They emphasized the importance of personal transformation and self-actualization through therapy and communal living, and they believed in the power of group dynamics and collective support to facilitate individual growth. The group promoted an open and non-hierarchical structure, with members encouraged to participate in decision-making and self-expression. They employed a form of radical therapy known as encounter groups, where members would engage in intense, emotionally charged interactions aimed at uncovering deep-seated psychological issues and promoting personal insight. These therapy sessions often involved confrontational and cathartic experiences. The Sullivanians lived together in communal houses throughout New York City, sharing resources and responsibilities, and they embraced an ethos of cooperation and mutual support, with members encouraged to contribute to the community's well-being. The Sullivanians would eventually face criticism and controversy over their therapeutic methods and communal lifestyle, and critics accused the group of employing coercive and manipulative tactics in their therapy sessions, as well as exerting undue influence over members' lives. Some former members even described the feeling pressured to conform to group norms and ideologies, leading to feelings of dependency and loss of individual autonomy. By the late 1980s, the Sullivanians had begun to decline in influence and membership, and internal conflicts, financial difficulties, and negative media attention contributed to the group's downfall. In 1996, Saul Newton died, marking the end of the Sullivanians as a cohesive organization. Alright, next up we have Falun Gong. And Falun Gong, known as Falun Dafa, is a spiritual practice that originated in China in the early 1990s. It combines elements of traditional Chinese Qigong, exercises, meditation, and moral philosophy. And the founder of Falun Gong is Li Hongzhi, who introduced the practice to the public in 1992. The practitioners of this group follow the teachings of Li, which emphasize the cultivation of the mind, body, and spirit through a combination of meditation, gentle exercises, and adherence to moral principles such as truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Practitioners believe that by following these teachings, they can attain spiritual enlightenment and improve their physical health. Despite initially enjoying popularity in China, Falun Gong faced persecution from Chinese government in the late 1990s. The Chinese Communist Party viewed Falun Gong as a threat to its authority and launched a widespread crackdown on the practice, arresting and imprisoning thousands of practitioners, suppressing Falun Gong publications, and subjecting practitioners to forced labor, torture, and even organ harvesting. Members of Falun Gong have organized peaceful protests and campaigns to raise awareness of the persecution they face in China, and they have also established a significant presence outside of China with millions of practitioners around the world participating in group exercises, meditation sessions, and community activities. While they have faced criticism and controversy, with some skeptics and critics labeling it as a cult or a pseudo-scientific movement, Falun Gong continues to be active around the world, despite ongoing repression in China. Alright, moving on to Tier 3. Yeah, good job, guys. We're doing it. Alright, first off, we have the Anthill Kids cult, also known as the Anthill cult or the Rock Thériault cult, was a notorious religious group led by Rock Thériault in Quebec, Canada during the 1970s and 1980s, and Rock claimed to be a prophet and chosen messenger of God, and he attracted followers who were drawn to his charismatic personality and promises of spiritual enlightenment. Now, the Anthill Kids adhered to a mix of religious and apocalyptic beliefs, heavily influenced by Rock's interpretations of Christianity and his own delusions of grandeur. He believed himself to be a divine figure with special powers and claimed to receive messages directly from God. The cult practiced communal living and followed strict rules set by Rock, including severe punishment for disobedience. He demanded total loyalty and obedience from his followers, who revered him as a prophet, and his followers were mostly individuals who were vulnerable or searching for meaning in their lives, and they were often isolated from friends and family by the cult's insular community. Rock subjected his followers to physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, using extreme methods to maintain control of them, and members were not allowed to speak to each other when he was not present, nor were they allowed to have sex with each other without his permission. He uses charisma to cover for his increasingly abusive and erratic behavior, and none of the other members questioned his judgment or openly blamed him for any physical, mental, or emotional damage. If a person wished to leave the commune, Rock would hit them with either a belt or a hammer, suspend them from a ceiling, pluck each of their body hairs out individually, or even defecate on them. The Anthill Kids would raise money for living by selling baked goods, and members who did not bring in enough money were also punished. Over time, his punishments became increasingly extreme and violent, including making members break their own legs with sledgehammers, sit on lit stoves, shoot each other over the shoulders, and eat dead mice and feces. A follower would sometimes be asked to cut off another follower's toes with wire cutters to prove loyalty. The abuse even extended to the cult's children, who were sexually abused, held over fires, or nailed to trees, while other children threw stones at them. One of Rock's wives even left a newborn child outside to die in freezing temperatures to keep him away from the abuse. Rock attempted to backtrack to the original religious mission of the commune, beginning to strongly believe in purifying his followers and ridding them of their sins through abusive purification sessions where the members would be completely nude as he whipped and beat them. He claimed to be a holy being and started performing unnecessary amateur surgical operations on sick members to demonstrate his healing powers, and these quote surgeries included injecting 94% ethanol solution into stomachs or performing circumcisions on the children and the adults of the group. In 1987, social workers ended up removing 17 children from the commune. However, Rock faced no repercussions for his abusive acts. A couple years later, in 1989, when a follower, Solange Boillard, complained of an upset stomach, Rock performed another amateur surgery without anesthesia, and he laid her naked on the table, punched her in the stomach, and then forced a plastic tube into her rectum to perform a crude enema with molasses and olive oil. He cut open her abdomen with a knife and ripped out part of her intestines with his bare hands, and he made another member stitch her up using needle and thread, and had the other women shove a tube down her throat and blow through it. Solange died the next day from the damage inflicted by the procedures. In claiming to possess the power of resurrection, Rock had his followers saw off the cap of Solange's skull, and he ejaculated onto her brain. Of course, Solange did not return back to life, and her corpse was buried a short distance from the Anthill Kids commune. One of the members, Gabrielle Lavallee, underwent harsh treatment at the Ontario commune during the late 1980s, suffering welding torch burns to her genitals, a hypodermic needle breaking off in her back, and 8 of her teeth being forcibly removed. She attempted to escape the commune after Rock cut off parts of her breast and smashed her head in with a blunt side of an axe, but upon her return, he removed one of her fingers with wire cutters, pinned her hand to a wooden table with a hunting knife, and used a cleaver to amputate her arm. In 1989, Rock would be arrested for the assault on Gabrielle Israel after she fled the commune again and contacted the authorities, effectively dissolving the Anthill Kids. This all led to a police investigation with the eventual arrest and conviction of Rock for multiple counts of assault, kidnapping, and murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison and died in custody in 2011. Following his arrest, the cult disbanded and the remaining members went their separate ways. Alright, next up we have Blood Over Intent, and this is not typically considered a cult in traditional sense, but rather a belief system or ideology propagated by certain individuals or groups online. The term blood over intent refers to a practice where individuals write their desires or intentions on a piece of paper in their own blood and publicly share videos or posts of themselves performing this act. Followers of blood over intent believe in the power of blood as a sacred and potent substance that can be used to manifest one's desires or intentions, and they often express a belief in esoteric or occult concepts, such as the idea that blood carries spiritual energy, or that writing intentions in blood can somehow influence the universe. There is no centralized leadership or formal organization associated with blood over intent. Instead, it consists of individuals who subscribe to the belief system and participate in the writing of their intentions in blood. It remains a relatively niche belief system or ideology within certain online communities and has gained some attention and followers on social media platforms and internet forums. It's not widely recognized or accepted as a mainstream religious or spiritual movement, and the practice continues to exist in various forms online. Alright, next up we have the Branch Davidians cult, and the Branch Davidians were a religious group that originated as a schism from the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the 1930s. This group followed a unique interpretation of Christian theology, which included beliefs in the imminent return of Jesus Christ, the importance of prophecy, and the establishment of a Davidic kingdom. They believed that their leader, David Koresh, was the final prophet and, quote, the Lamb of God mentioned in the book of Revelation. David Koresh became this charismatic leader in the late 1980s and early 1990s, as he claimed to have received divine revelations and held absolute authority over his followers. The group attracted individuals from various backgrounds who were drawn to David's teachings and the sense of community within the compound. The Branch Davidians lived at this compound known as the Mount Carmel Center near Waco, Texas, and they engaged in religious study, worship, and preparation for what they believed to be the imminent end of times. They stockpiled weapons and supplies, believing in the need to defend themselves against perceived enemies and government intrusion. They would come under intense scrutiny from law enforcement and federal authorities due to reports of illegal weapons possession and allegations of child abuse within the compound. And on February 28, 1993, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or ATF, attempted to execute a search warrant at the Mount Carmel Center, resulting in a shootout that left 4 ATF agents dead and 6 Branch Davidians dead. This would then trigger a 51-day standoff between the cult and federal authorities. On April 19, 1993, the standoff would culminate into a final assault by the FBI, and the compound would end up catching fire during this assault, resulting in the deaths of 76 Branch Davidians, including David Koresh. The cause of the fire remains a subject of debate, with some arguing that it was started by Branch Davidians themselves and others contending that it was ignited by tear gas canisters fired by law enforcement. Following the events of Waco, the Branch Davidians experienced a significant decline in membership and influence, and the compound was ultimately demolished, and the site is now a memorial to those who died. Some former members continue to advocate for their beliefs and challenge the official narrative surrounding the events at Waco, while others have moved on with their lives. Alright, next up we have Creativity. And Creativity, or the Church of the Creator, also known as the Creativity Movement, is a white supremacist and neo-Nazi organization founded in the United States in the 1970s by Ben Klassen. The group promotes a racist and anti-Semitic ideology centered around the belief in the superiority of the white race and the necessity of creating a racially homogeneous society. They espouse a belief system known as, quote, creativity, which is based on the idea that creativity is the eternal religion of the white race. They advocate for the preservation and advancement of the white race and promote the segregation or elimination of non-white races. The group's ideology is characterized by extreme racism, anti-Semitism, and hatred towards minority groups. Now, Ben Klassen, a former Florida state legislator, founded the Church of the Creator and served as its leader until his death in 1993. Following his death, the leadership of the organization passed to various individuals within the movement, and the Church of the Creator attracted followers primarily from white supremacist and neo-Nazi circles, as well as individuals disillusioned with mainstream society. They engage in various activities to promote its racist ideology, including publishing literature, organizing rallies and protests, and disseminating propaganda through websites and social media platforms. They promote the idea of a racial holy war and advocate for the establishment of a white ethno-state free from non-white influence. They've been linked to acts of violence and terrorism motivated by its extremist ideology, and members or sympathizers of the group have been involved in hate crimes, acts of vandalism, and acts of domestic terrorism, targeting minority groups and individuals perceived as enemies of the white race. They have faced legal challenges and scrutiny from law enforcement and civil rights organizations due to its promotion of hate speech and advocacy for violence. However, they still remain active in promoting its racist and supremacist ideology. Alright, next up we have Russian Doomsday Cult. And the Russian Doomsday Cult, or True Russian Orthodox Church, was founded by Pyotr Kuznetsov, which borrowed some ideas from Eastern Orthodoxy. This group broke away from the Russian Orthodox Church, considering it insufficiently orthodox, and its members were not allowed to eat processed food, watch television, or handle money. They rejected barcodes, national identification number, and passports because they seemed to contain satanic symbols. In November 2007, between 29 and 35 members of the group holed themselves up in a cave in Russia's Penza region, threatening mass suicide if authorities tried to intervene. Pyotr told them to hide themselves away to await the end of the world, which he predicted would take place in May of 2008. However, he was not with the group and had been placed under police arrest. In March of 2008, 14 members emerged from the cave after melting snow caused part of the cave to collapse. And in April of 2008, Pyotr was taken to a hospital where officials say that he attempted suicide after realizing his prediction was wrong. In subsequent years, he was in a psychiatric ward with a diagnosis of paranoia, and in 2016, the court resigned him to a regional psychiatric clinic. And in May of 2008, the last 9 members of the cult emerged from the bunker due to the toxic fumes produced by 2 cult members who had died over winter. In May 21st, 2008, after removing the bodies of the dead, the cave was blown up. And officially this was done because of its danger to local population and to prevent curious visitors from entering. And after leaving the cave, the cult officially disbanded. Alright, next up we have the Movement for the Restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. And this was a religious cult that operated in Uganda in the late 1990s and early 2000s, led by a group of self-proclaimed prophets and visionaries. The cult was founded on a synchronous blend of Christian and apocalyptic beliefs centered around the imminent end of the world and return of Jesus Christ. Members believed that by following the 10 Commandments and adhering to the teachings of the cult leaders, they could achieve salvation and be spared from the impending apocalypse. Among these prominent leaders were Credonia MaelRadec, Joseph Kibwetire, and Joseph Katarabebo, who were revered as prophets and spiritual guides by the cult's followers. The cult operated as a tightly knit community with members living in compounds controlled by the leaders, and they engaged in prayer, worship, and adherence to strict rules and regulations set forth by the cult leaders. By 1997, the movement's membership was listed at nearly 5,000 people, and in 1998, Ugandan press reported that the movement had been shut down for unsanitary conditions, use of child labor, and possibly kidnapping children, but the sect was allowed by the government to reopen. Members claimed that the world would end in 2000 and there was no time to waste, and with the new year looming, activity by the members became frenzied as their leaders urged them to confess their sins in preparation for the end. January 1st, 2000 would pass without the advent of the apocalypse, and the movement began to unravel. Many began to question the leaders, and payments to the church decreased dramatically. And it's believed that the events that followed this were orchestrated by sect leaders in response to the crisis within the ranks. And another date was chosen by leaders for the apocalypse to occur, with March 17th, 2000 being announced, and the leaders claimed that it would come with ceremony and finality. The cult held a huge party at Kanungu, where they roasted 3 bulls and drank 70 crates of soft drinks. After most of the members arrived to the party, nearby villagers heard an explosion, and the building was engulfed in flames that killed all 530 people within attendance, as the windows and doors of the building had all been boarded up to prevent people from leaving. 4 days after the church fire, police investigated cult properties and discovered hundreds of bodies at sites across southern Uganda, all at different compounds. Members of the cult had been poisoned, stabbed, and burnt alive. After searching all sites, police announced that the final death toll had settled at 924 people. The initial suspicion was that all of the members died in a mass suicide. However, this ended up being revised into a mass murder by the leaders of the cult. Although it was initially assumed that the 5 leaders had died in the fire, police believe that they are all still alive and in hiding and issued an international warrant for their arrest. As of 2024, they have not been located and no one has been prosecuted in connection to the massacre. Alright, next up we have Order of the Nine Angels. And the Order of the Nine Angels, ONA or O9A, is a satanic and left-hand path occultist group, which is based in the United Kingdom and rose to public recognition in the early 1980s, attracting attention for its neo-Nazi ideology and activism. The Order of the Nine Angels promotes the idea that human history can be divided into a series of aeons, each of which contains a corresponding human civilization. It expresses the view that the current aeonic civilization is that of the Western world, but it claims that the evolution of this society is threatened by Magian or Nazarene influence of the Judeo-Christian religion, which the order seeks to combat in order to establish a militaristic new social order, which it calls the Imperium. It advocates a spiritual path in which practitioners are required to break societal taboos by isolating themselves from society, committing crimes, embracing political extremism and violence, and carrying out acts of human sacrifice. ONA members practice magic, believing that they are able to do it by channeling energies into their own casual realm, and these magical actions are designed to help them achieve their ultimate goal of establishing the Imperium. Now, it doesn't necessarily have a leadership, just think of it as, you know, those guys. Yeah, and the group doesn't really have official membership. It's more of like an ideology. And this group is really notorious due to the amount of followers that have perpetrated crimes in the name of this cult. In 2019, specialist Jared William Smith was charged with distributing information related to explosions and weapons of mass destruction towards a member of the cult, to which he was arrested. A US paratrooper named Ethan Melzer plotted an ambush on his unit to, quote, result in the deaths of as many of his fellow service members as possible. And he was charged in June 2020 with conspiring and attempting to murder military service members and attempting to provide material support to terrorists. He was charged with leaking classified information to his co-conspirators in the Order of the Nine Angels, and he was sentenced to 45 years in prison. After Ethan Melzer was exposed, several other active members of the US military were also discovered to be members of the Order of the Nine Angels. And this really just led to a whole domino effect of people getting arrested for conspiracy. Now, not only have the members been arrested for acts of perpetuating and planning violence, but allegations have been made towards this group of sexual abuse, as there are writings, or I guess fucking manuals, that this group has called the Drekian Way, the Iron Gates, Bluebird, and the Rape Anthology that recommend and praise rape and pedophilia, even suggesting rape is necessary for ascension to the Ubermensch. To advance in rank, members of the Order of the Nine Angels must perform assaults, lynchings, and sexual assault being the most recommended. Now, without surprise, there are many members that have been arrested and convicted for sexual assaults and tortures of minors, as well as members that were found to be in possession of child pornography. Not only this, but there is a faction of the Order of the Nine Angels called Rape Waffen that encourages its members to rape white women in order to increase the number of white births. There are many other branches of the Order of the Nine Angels, such as, yeah, it's just a long list. Just imagine, like, you know, those neo-Nazi type dudes. Now, of course, they continue to operate in various forms, primarily through online networks and forums, and while its influence remains relatively limited compared to other occult satanic groups, their extreme ideology and controversial reputation have earned it a degree of notoriety within certain communities. The group's secretive nature and decentralized structure make it difficult to access its actual size, but it continues to attract individuals drawn to its radical and subversive teachings. Alright, next up we have Universal Medicine, and Universal Medicine, or Unimed, or UM, is a cult founded and led by Serge Benayan, who is a former bankrupt tennis coach from New South Wales, Australia, who has absolutely no medical qualifications. This cult sells, quote, esoteric healing products, music, publications, workshops, and courses, while none of the healing modalities are evidence-based or have even been proven by scientific research. And signature treatments practiced and taught by Universal Medicine are, quote, esoteric breast massage, esoteric healing, ovarian readings, chakra puncture, esoteric connective tissue therapy, and esoteric ovary massage. And all of these treatments were devised by non-registered health practitioner Serge. The belief system is based on the occult teachings of early 20th century theosophist Alice A. Bailey, and Serge claims to be the reincarnation of Leonardo da Vinci and Pythagoras, as well as Alice A. Bailey and Saint Peter. He devised universal medicine's healing practices based on the belief that disease is caused by energetic disharmony resulting from ill choices made in this and previous lifetimes. He also teaches that illness is caused by possession of the body by evil spirits, and is reported to have told a terminally ill patient that an evil spirit had entered her liver and kidneys. He also teaches couples that when a man orgasms inside a woman, she will take on his bad energy, and he has said that if a possessed entity is of a sexual nature, they can invade a father's body while he sleeps at night, possess him, and then make him his daughters. I don't know. On race, he writes that skin color evolution was a conscious choice and that Asians chose yellow skin, saying that, quote, yellow signifies intellect. Yeah, you kind of know where this is going. He's even claimed that he could orgasm as a hermaphrodite, claiming that he has the ability to orgasm like a woman and ejaculate as a man simultaneously. Now, members of this association are charged an annual fee, and clients have been reported to spend tens of thousands of Australian dollars on universal medicine products and services. They also provide counseling services to parents, body awareness education workshops to young women, and as well as exorcism sessions for children. It all seems like an excuse for like Serge to like touch women and stuff. Like I said, there's esoteric breast massage, which costs $60 per breast, and it's promoted to, quote, cure or prevent breast cancer. I don't know. Now, of course, universal medicine has faced significant controversy and criticism, with allegations of cult-like behavior, financial exploitation, and psychological manipulation. And former members and journalists have described experiences of control, isolation, and pressure to conform to the organization's teachings. However, despite ongoing controversy and scrutiny, universal medicine continues to operate and attract followers in Australia and other parts of the world. The organization maintains an active online presence, offering workshops, courses, and healing sessions to its followers. However, its reputation remains divisive, with ongoing debate and criticism surrounding its beliefs, practices, and leaderships. But if you ever want an esoteric breast massage, you know where to go for only $120 for both titties. Alright, next up we have Unification Church, and Unification Church, also known as the Family Federation for World Peace and Unification, or simply the Moonies, is a religious movement founded by Sun Myung Moon in South Korea in 1954. The movement gained prominence in the United States and other parts of the world during the latter half of the 20th century, and while some consider it a legitimate religious organization, others classify it as a cult due to its controversial beliefs and practices. The church itself combines elements of Christianity with unique teachings and interpretations introduced by its founder, Sun Myung Moon. Central to the movement's beliefs is the concept of divine principle, which teaches that Moon is the Messiah chosen by God to fulfill Jesus' unfinished mission on earth. Followers believe in the importance of achieving God-centered marriages and building a world of peace and unity under Moon's guidance. Moon served as the founder and spiritual leader of the Unification Church until his death in 2012, and he was revered as the true parent and true father by his followers, who consider him to be a divine figure with the authority to guide humanity towards spiritual alignment and salvation. His wife, Hak Jahan, assumed a leadership role within the movement following his death. Now they have attracted followers from diverse backgrounds, often targeting young people and students through recruitment efforts, mass weddings, and outreach programs. And members of this movement, known as Moonies, are expected to dedicate themselves fully to the teachings and mission of the church, often living in communal settings and participating in fundraising activities to support the organization. The church emphasizes the importance of spiritual growth, family values, and collective action to achieve its goals of world peace and unity, and they engage in various practices, including prayer, scripture study, and participation in church-sponsored events. events and activities. They also gained notoriety for the mass weddings, where thousands of couples from around the world were married in large ceremonies officiated by Moon. The church has faced criticism and controversy over its beliefs, as critics raised concerns about allegations of brainwashing, financial exploitation, and manipulation of followers, particularly during the height of its expansion in the 1970s and 80s. However, since Moon's death in 2012, the church has undergone significant changes and challenges, and while the movement continues to operate and maintain a presence in various countries around the world, its influence and membership have declined in recent years. Alright, next up we have the System Space Cult. And the System Space Cult, or the Suki Project, was a website based on the belief that our reality is just one system among many in the universe, and that when we die, we ascend to the next system. In January of 2017, a 4chan user by the name of Suki gained attention at the launch of the Suki Project. The Suki Project alleged that by joining the website, the registrants, called migrants, would ascend from the system space, or life, to the next system upon their death. Users were warned not to die before the date of ascension and not to commit suicide, otherwise their souls would not transfer from life to the next system. The website gained popularity from all over the internet after being featured in numerous YouTube videos and being posted about in many forums and websites, and several theories were born from its creation. Some said it was a hoax, others a marketing stunt for the release of a new game or television series, and some even a death cult. Much of the information on the website was purposefully cryptic, with links leading to images with static and black and white pixels, leading to even more theories about encrypted messages hidden on the website. The site ended after a countdown on the 1st of July in 2017, and the Suki Project has since been taken down, but archives and mirrors of them still exist today. Alright, next up we have the Misanthropic Luciferian Order, or the Temple of the Blacklight, and this was a satanic cult founded in Sweden in 1990. It originally had 3 members, Vlad Koshnud, John Nodvite, and another member who left the group early. His name was Johan Norman, and he joined the order at the same time as John, but left the group when Vlad and John would start talking about committing violent acts. Vlad's girlfriend became a supporting member of the group, and it never grew beyond this size again. And as a sign of membership, the 3 had a symbol tattooed on their arms of a so-called vampire pentagram that Vlad had designed. Now, this cult believed in what they titled Chaosophy. They believed in the Jewish and biblical creation theory of Adam and Eve and the existence of the Abrahamic God, or Yahweh, that according to them created the universe, but unlike the followers of the Abrahamic faiths, they instead reject Yahweh and want to see this creation not to have taken place and wish to destroy it or cause its non-existence through magic and rituals. They believe that chaos is an infinite dimensional plane of possibilities, and they also believe that in comparison with the linear time of the cosmos, chaos can be described as timeless in the way that is not contained nor limited by one-dimensional time. They would gain notoriety in the summer of 1997 when a man, Yosef Ben Medur, was murdered by members Vlad and John. This act was described to the police as a homophobic hate crime, and when John and Vlad were arrested for the crime respectively in December, the police discovered satanic altars in the homes of the 2 suspects. A human skull was also found at Vlad's home, and he was charged with the possession of human parts. During their investigations, the police interrogated a former member of the cult and Vlad's girlfriend, who described the organization and narrated the occult ceremonies they had attended. Rituals included meditation, invocations of demons, and animal sacrifices. Now, surprisingly, John was sentenced to 8 years in prison for accessory to murder and illegal possession of a firearm, while Vlad was sentenced to 10 years for murder, violence against his girlfriend, illegal possession of a firearm, and body parts. And they would be released in 2004 after spending 7 years in prison. And John would commit suicide in 2006, his body being found at his apartment, surrounded by a ring of candles and a satanic ritual book by his side. Alright, moving on to tier 4. Yeah. Let's go. First off, we have the Kirtland Cult. And the Kirtland Cult was a Latter-day Saint movement-based cult ran by Jeffrey Don Lundgren, and it started when he was living in a church-owned home in Kirtland, Ohio. He would volunteer as a tour guide at the reorganized Church of the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, historic Kirtland Temple next door, and in this capacity, he began to teach the concept of dividing the world, also known as chiastic interpretation or chiasmus. His teachings of scriptural interpretations attracted him followers, and by the end of 1987, 7, he would move his family to a rented farmhouse, and at the time, some of his followers started to move into his new home as well. While living at the farmhouse, he began to practice methods which were consistent with other forms of mind control performed by cults, as for example, cult members were forbidden to talk amongst themselves, as doing so was a sin called murmuring, and he would also eavesdrop on cult members to cause them to believe he could read their minds. Basically formed his own small cult that had around 20 people, which was composed of reorganized Latter-day Saints members. He began to offer Bible study sessions at his home, and there he would dominate the sessions and intimidate anyone who did not agree with his interpretations of Scripture. And later, he would encourage others to intimidate those who disagreed as well. And through his teachings, he sought to convince his followers that he was God's last prophet. Now, after being excommunicated from the Kirtland Temple, Jeffrey ended up telling his followers that it would be necessary to seize the temple by force and hold it for a momentous event. This involved burglarizing adjacent church homes and committing murder as part of the takeover. And he called the land around the temple the vineyards, which had to be redeemed or cleansed for him and his followers to take the temple. By this time, 7 of Jeffrey's 12 followers had moved into his family's farmhouse. However, the remaining 5 followers were members of Dennis Avery's family, and Jeffrey felt that the Averys were committing a sin by not living in his house. Jeffrey considered the Averys to be weak, using the family as a scapegoat for the sex troubles, even though the family was one of the biggest financial contributors. In time, Jeffrey convinced his followers that they had to seize the temple, and they planned to kill anyone who stood in their way. He, however, changed his mind when he started telling his followers that they had to kill a family of 5 if they wanted to see God. As punishment for this, quote, disloyalty, he would choose the Averys, and he referred to this upcoming slaughter as pruning the vineyard. On April of 1989, Jeffrey would order 2 of his followers to dig a pit in the barn in anticipation of burying the Averys' bodies there, and Jeffrey told the rest of his followers, including the Averys, that they were going to go on a wilderness trip. 7 days later, on April 17th, he rented a motel room and had dinner with all of his followers, and he called all the group's men into his room, getting their reassurance that they were in with Jeffrey on the upcoming sacrifice. According to the followers' admissions, Jeffrey would later enter the barn with a church member named Ron Luff, luring Avery into a place where the other men awaited by asking him for help with the equipment for the camping trip. Ron attempted to render Avery unconscious with a stun gun. A stun bullet struck Avery but failed to knock him out. He was then gagged and dragged to a place where Jeffrey awaited him, and he was shot twice in the back, dying instantly. Now, to mask the sound of a gun, a chainsaw inside the barn was left running, and Ron then told Avery's wife, Cheryl, that her husband needed help. She was gagged just like her husband, but also had duct tape put over her eyes and dragged to Jeffrey. She was then shot 3 times and killed. Her body laid next to her husband's, and the Avery's 15-year-old daughter, Trina, was shot twice in the head. Their 13-year-old daughter, Becky, was shot twice and left to die, and their 6-year-old daughter, Karen, was shot in the chest and head. The next day, Jeffrey ended up moving with the rest of his cult to West Virginia, and becoming more paranoid, he only took his personal family and moved to California, leaving the rest of the surviving cult members behind. 9 months after the killings, a tip from an informant led police back to the long-abandoned barn where the 5 bodies of the Avery family were recovered, and Jeffrey and his family became fugitives. Media attention increased, and police began to track the cult members, with the FBI joining in on the manhunt. Eventually, 13 members of Jeffrey's cult were arrested in early 1990, including his wife. He was given the death penalty, and his wife received 5 life sentences, and their son was given 120 years. Ron, the key planner and facilitator of the murders, was sentenced to 170 years. Another member was sentenced to 50 years, and 5 of the cult members were released in 2010 or early 2011 after 20 years of incarceration. On October 24th, 2006, Jeffrey Lundgren was executed at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville, and nobody ever claimed his body, so he was buried in the prison cemetery. Alright, next up we have Love is One, and Love is One, also known as Galactic Federation of Light and 5D Full Disclosure, is an American new religious movement which was led by Amy Carlson, referred to within the group as Mother God, who described herself, among other things, the creator of the universe. And their theology has been described as fluid, combining New Age spirituality, conspiracy theories, and elements of mainstream Abrahamic religions. The group proclaimed that Amy was a divine 19 billion year old being who had birthed all creation. Amy claimed that she had been reincarnated 534 times, including as Jesus, Cleopatra, Joan of Arc, and Marilyn Monroe, and that she herself would lead 144,000 people into a mystical fifth dimension. The group claimed that Amy was the queen of the lost continent of Lemuria, and the group incorporated the belief that the Lemurians lived within Mount Shasta in California. They also adopted elements of QAnon conspiracy theory, believing that the world was run by a cabal determined to keep the planet in a, quote, low vibration state. Members routinely expressed speculation that the COVID-19 pandemic was planned and that the Sandy Hook Massacre, 9/11, and the Holocaust were all hoaxes. In September of 2020, Carlson would report that she was in poor health and was paralyzed from the waist down, with herself stating that she had cancer. A couple weeks later, on April 28, 2021, the mummified corpse of Amy Carlson was discovered in the Mission House near Crestone. Its state of decay suggested she had been dead for several weeks, and she was 45 at the time of her death. The body was found in a sleeping bag wrapped in Christmas lights, and her face was covered in glitter, in what authorities stated was a makeshift shrine. 7 members were charged with the abuse of a corpse, as well as child abuse due to presence of 2 children in the property, and a photo from a few weeks before she is thought to have died shows her appearance to be emaciated, with thinning hair and discolored skin with a purplish hue. Authorities stated that Carlson had not died on the property, but in California, and her body was subsequently transported back to Colorado. After her death, the group claimed that she had ascended, and the cult website was taken offline. Alright, next up we have the Circle of Friends, and this was a cult that operated from the 1970s out of Morristown, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C. Its nominal head was George Jurskek, who was born in Hungary and immigrated to the United States, becoming naturalized around 1953. According to testimony by former members, George gave millenariist lectures twice a week about great political and economic collapse that would occur before 2000. The group ended up calling themselves a capitalistic commune with a mission of making its members healthy, wealthy, and wise, and they were headquartered in the former Salt's Hotel at West Hanover Avenue, which the group purchased for around $600,000 in 1978. As of that time, they owned multiple properties and businesses, including a security guard service and real estate, investment, and construction companies. The Circle of Friends would draw initiates into the cult with messages of special knowledge and spiritual/racial theory that seduced members into believing that they would be among the surviving Gnostic elite after the apocalypse that was coming. George drew on the popular spiritual teachings of Hal Lindsey and a variety of Hindu teachings about the Kali Yuga regarding the end time. It wasn't until 1988 that George Jurczyk and Mary O'Rourke were tried for conspiracy and fraud on student loan defaults, and 6 members of the group testified for the prosecution. The 2 were convicted of fraud and conspiracy, and they faced up to 20 years of imprisonment and fines of up to $200,000 each. And the cult has since disbanded. Alright, next up we have John Frum, and John Frum is a figure associated with the cargo cults on the island of Tanna in Vanuatu, and he is often depicted as an American World War II serviceman who will bring wealth and prosperity to the people if they follow him. And in one analysis of the cult, the figure was first known as John Broome, who was believed by followers to one day return from a distant land to sweep away the white colonials and return riches to the islands. In some versions of the story, a native man named Menehivi, using the alias John Frum, began appearing among the native people of Tanna, dressed in a Western-style coat, assuring the people that he would bring them houses, clothes, food, and transport. Others contend that John Frum was a kava-induced spirit vision, said to be a manifestation of Kara Paramoon. This John Frum promised the dawn of a new age in which all white people, including missionaries, would depart from Tanna, leaving behind their goods and property for the native Melanesians. For this to happen, however, the people of Tanna had to reject all aspects of European society, including money, Western education, Christianity, and work on copra plantations, and they had to return to their traditional customs. The movement gained popularity in the early 1940s after 50,000 American troops were stationed in Tanna during World War II, bringing them enormous amounts of supplies or cargo. During the war, approximately 10,000 Vanuatu men served in the Vanuatu Labor Corps. They provided logistical support to the Allied war effort during the Guadalcanal campaign, and this mass participation of Vanuatu men in the Labor Corps had a significant effect on the John Frum movement, giving it the characteristics of this cargo cult. After the war and departure of the Americans, followers of the John Frum built symbolic landing strips to encourage American airplanes to land and bring them cargo. Versions of the cult emphasized American connections and interpreted John from could mean John from America, although it could mean John from anywhere that's not Vanuatuan origin. Followers of the movement continue to celebrate John Frum Day each year, and it remains an integral part of the cultural and religious landscape for many indigenous communities. Alright, next up we have Brother Stare. And the Brother Stare cult refers to the religious movement led by Ralph Gordon Stare, commonly known as Brother Stare. He was an American preacher who gained notoriety for his apocalyptic predictions, authoritarian leadership style, and controversial teachings. His belief system was characterized by a blend of fundamentalist Christianity, end times prophecy, and authoritarianism. Claiming to be a prophet and messenger of God, often making bold predictions about impending cataclysmic events and the imminent return of Jesus Christ. His teachings also included strict adherence to his interpretation of biblical doctrines, including teachings on repentance, sin, and judgment. He attracted followers from across the United States and around the world, particularly among those drawn to his apocalyptic message and charismatic personality. Many of his followers were deeply devoted to him, viewing him as a prophet and spiritual guide. However, there were reports of manipulation, psychological abuse, and exploitation of followers within the cult. The cult was very well known for its radio broadcasts, which featured Brother Stare delivering sermons, prophecies, and messages from God. The cult also hosted regular gatherings at its compound, where followers would gather and listen to Stare's teachings and participate in worship services, which usually focused on themes of judgment, repentance, and preparation for the end times. Over the years, Brother Stare and his ministry faced numerous controversies and legal troubles. As in 2002, Stare, age 69, would be arrested in Walterboro on 2 counts of criminal sexual conduct in the second degree. 2 women associated with him, ages 17 and 20, alleged that he coerced them by enforcing his religious personal beliefs on them. In 2004, he would plead guilty to the charge of assault and battery and was sentenced to time served and spent a total of 77 days in custody. During his incarceration, recorded programs of the cult continued to be broadcast, and his conviction caused division within the community. He would be arrested again in 2017 on 8 counts, which included 3 counts of first-degree criminal sexual conduct and single counts of assault with the intent to commit criminal sexual conduct, kidnapping, second-degree assault, first-degree burglary, and third-degree criminal sexual conduct with a minor. He came to the attention of authorities because of YouTube videos showing him touching a 12-year-old girl's breast during service and then saying, quote, "I'm going to touch them things till nobody else can touch them." Another video showed a 16-year-old girl accusing him of sexually assaulting her over a 5-month period, and 4 women described assaults including groping and rape. Brother Stare reportedly told the women that the acts were God's will, and he was released on a $750,000 bond a month later on the condition that he would not leave his property and was electronically monitored. Brother Stare would die of heart failure at the age of 87 in April of 2021, and the cult continues to have a presence online through a website and archived radio broadcasts. However, it is unclear whether it will continue to operate or if it will eventually dissolve without its leader. Alright, next up we have Rajneeshpuram, and this was not exactly a cult, but rather a commune established by the followers of the Indian spiritual guru Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, later known as Osho, in the 1980s. The commune was located in rural Oregon in the United States and was intended to be a utopian community based on the teachings of Rajneesh. The followers of this cult believed in the teachings which emphasized meditation, mindfulness, and individual spiritual growth. Rajneesh encouraged his followers to embrace their desires and passions as a means of achieving enlightenment, often advocating for a liberated approach to sexuality and relationships. His teachings also included elements of Eastern spirituality, psychology, and mysticism. Rajneesh attracted thousands of followers, known as sannyasins, who sought to live according to Rajneesh's teachings in a communal setting. Many of the followers were disillusioned with mainstream society and were drawn to the promise of a new way of life based on spiritual exploration, community living, and personal growth. The residents of Rajneeshpuram engaged in various activities aimed at building and sustaining a commune, and this included agriculture, construction, meditation retreats, therapy sessions, and communal celebrations. Commune also operated a business, including a restaurant, clothing boutique, and publishing house. However, Rajneeshpuram was embroiled in numerous controversies during its existence, as tensions with local residents and government authorities in Oregon led to conflicts over land use, zoning regulations, and political representations. The commune would also face allegations of criminal activity, including immigration fraud, wiretapping, and bioterrorism. In June of 1983, the bombing of Hotel Rajneesh, which was a Rajneeshi-owned hotel in Portland by the Islamist militant group Jamaat al-Faqra, heightened tensions, which led to the display of semi-automatic weapons acquired by the Rajneeshpuram Peace Force, created an image of imminent violence. Rumors would then arise of the National Guard being called out to arrest Rajneesh, and Rajneeshpuram would begin to grow in size, heightening tensions that led to certain fundamentalist Christian church leaders to denounce Rajneesh, the commune, and his followers. As Rajneesh himself did not speak in public during this period and gave very few interviews, his secretary and chief spokesperson, Ma Anand Sheila, or Sheila Silverman, became, for practical purposes, the leader of the commune. She did little to diffuse conflict, employing a crude and caustic defensive speaking style that exacerbated hostilities and attracted media attention. On September of 1985, Sheila and 15 the other 20 top officials abruptly left Rajneeshpuram. In the following week, Rajneesh convened press conferences and publicly accused Sheila and her team of committing crimes within and outside the commune. The subsequent criminal investigation, the largest in Oregon's history, confirmed that a selective group engaged in a variety of criminal activities, including the attempted murder of Rajneesh's physician, wiretapping, and bugging within the commune and within Rajneesh's home, poisonings of 2 public officials, and arsons. It was revealed in 1984, Sheila Silverman coordinated an attack alongside Rajneeshpuram citizens to infect the salad bars of at least 10 restaurants in the country seat of Wasco County with salmonella in an attempt to incapacitate the voting population of the city so that their own candidates would win the 1984 Wasco City elections. While 751 people, including Wasco County public officials, were infected and 45 were hospitalized, there were no fatalities, and this incident is still regarded as the largest biological warfare attack in United States history. Local residents suspecting Rajneeshpuram to be involved in the poisonings turned out in droves on election day to prevent them from winning any county positions. The Rajneeshes eventually withdrew their candidate from the 1984 ballot, rendering their plot unsuccessful. Sheila Silverman would be extradited from West Germany and imprisoned for attempted murder, assault, wiretapping, arson, and immigration fraud, and her role in the bio attack. And Rajneesh himself was accused of immigrant violations, to which he entered the Alford plea. He agreed to leave the United States and eventually returned to India, and his followers left Oregon shortly afterwards. Alright, next up we have One Taste, and One Taste Incorporated was a business primarily dedicated to teaching the practices of, quote, orgasmic meditation. Though it embraced ideas based in Eastern philosophy, the central focus was a meditation practice around the sensation of a man touching a woman's genitalia, and was founded by Nicole Dedon and Robert Kandel in San Francisco. The organization's stated goal is to, quote, create a clean, well-lit place where sexuality, relationship, and intimacy could be discussed openly and honestly. Nicole draws parallels between slow sex and slow food movement associated with the chef Alice Waters. With sex as food, she says people can overindulge without getting nourishment, or go from one extreme to consuming mindlessly to the other extreme of self-denial. Now, this was all centered around this practice known as orgasmic meditation, which is a mindfulness practice in which the object of meditation is finger to genital contact, specifically stimulation of the female clitoris. Orgasmic meditation is practiced in pairs, with one practitioner stroking the female's genitals while both focus their attention on the sensation, with the stated goal of developing, quote, connective resonance between pairs. Practitioners state that orgasmic meditation encompasses more than just orgasm, and that it encourages greater emotional awareness, connected relationships, and sense of fulfillment. Now, of course, this drew international media attention, controversy, and even an FBI investigation. Several journalists compared One Taste to a cult and a pyramid scheme, as for example, a week-long training with Nicole was advertised at $36,000. In 2015, a former employee actually received a 6-figure settlement for sexual assault and harassment, and even at universities around the area, students are drawn to free One Taste events with ad boards such as "Tired of swiping left? Let's talk real intimacy." There is also a year-long $60,000 premium membership sold by the company. However, One Taste counters this by teaching their members that money is just an emotional obstacle. Former members of the organization have testified about their experience being in resemblance to kind of a prostitution ring, where managers frequently ordered staffers to engage in sexual relations with customers. And in June of 2020, the FBI opened a probe into one case for prostitution, sex trafficking, and violations of labor law. And in 2023, Nicole and former head of sales Rachel Sherwitz were indicted on charges of forced labor. And it has since shut down its in-person operations and shifted its focus to online education and coaching. Alright, next up we have the Finders, and the Finders were an intentional community and cult founded in Washington, D.C. in the early 1970s by former United States Air Force Master Sergeant Marion Petty. The beliefs and practices of the Finders are not well documented, and information about the group's ideology is limited, and some reports suggest that the Finders may have had elements of communal living, alternative spirituality, and an anti-government sentiment. And they came into wider public attention when 2 members of the movement were arrested in Tallahassee, Florida in 1987 and charged with misdemeanor child abuse of 6 children accompanying them. The 2 men were reportedly seen in a public park using a van to transport 6 children of varying ages between 2 and 11. The 2 oldest children, referred to as Mary and Max, were interviewed by law enforcement as the others were too young to properly communicate, and it was noted that medical examinations of the children showed signs of sexual abuse and malnutrition, as well as bite marks potentially belonging to an adult human. It was discovered that the children were raised on a farm belonging to Petty with little adult supervision, with there being around 20 adults and 1 other child present. The younger children were observed to display behavior indicating that they were not used to being in a house or using indoor plumbing, requesting to go outside to use the bathroom, or urinating their pants. And according to U.S. District Court records in Washington, a confidential police source told authorities that the Finders were a cult that conducted brainwashing techniques at a warehouse in Glover Park that was eventually raided by law enforcement. Police said some of the items seized from the raid showed pictures of children engaged in what appeared to be cult rituals, and officials of the U.S. Customs Service said that the material seized including photos showing children involved in bloodletting ceremonies of animals and 1 photograph of a child in chains. Federal authorities ended up concluding that there was no evidence of criminal activity, with it being noted that although more could have been done for the children, it was difficult to compile accurate information with the knowledge that they did have of their lifestyle only being able to be judged subjectively. The authorities contacted the mothers of the children, who came to Tallahassee to receive them. The Finders are often described as an early example of satanic panic in the U.S., and some authors have gone as far as describing the Finders as the quote patient zero to other conspiratorial beliefs regarding the U.S. intelligence services allegedly covering up or taking part in sexual abuse. And similar allegations of grand-scale governmental cover-up can be found in other claims, such as those surrounding the death of Jeffrey Epstein. Alright, next up we have the House of Yahweh, and this is a religious group founded by Yisrael Hawkins in the late 1970s in Abilene, Texas, and the group identifies itself as an assembly of believers who adhere to a form of Messianic Judaism, incorporating elements of Christianity and Hebrew roots teachings. The House of Yahweh follows a unique interpretation of the Bible, emphasizing strict adherence to the Old Testament laws and prophecies, and they believe in the imminent arrival of a messianistic figure known as Yahshua, whom they identify as the second coming of Jesus Christ. The group promotes observance of the Sabbath, dietary laws, and other practices associated with traditional Judaism, and they also hold apocalyptic beliefs, predicting a series of end-time events leading to the establishment of a new kingdom of righteousness on earth. Yisrael Hawkins, who also goes by the name of Buffalo Bill Hawkins, is the founder and leader of the House of Yahweh, and he claimed to be a prophet and the chosen messenger of Yahweh, tasked with delivering divine revelations and interpreting biblical prophecy. He would exert significant authority over his followers and is often regarded as spiritual authority within the group. They attracted followers from various backgrounds, including individuals interested in exploring Hebrew roots of teachings, end-time prophecy, and alternative interpretations of Christianity. Many followers were drawn to the group's emphasis on biblical literalism and the pursuit of righteousness in preparation for the prophesied kingdom of Yahweh. They engage in a range of religious activities, including worship services, Bible study sessions, and community gatherings, and they also operate a publishing arm that produces books, pamphlets, and other materials promoting their teachings. And the group maintains a compound in Abilene, Texas, where members live and participate in communal activities. The House of Yahweh has since faced controversy and scrutiny over the years, including allegations of cult-like behavior, authoritarian leadership, and financial exploitation of followers. In 2008, Yisrael Hawkins and several other members of the group were indicted on charges of bigamy, welfare fraud, and other offenses related to alleged mistreatment of children within the group. While Hawkins was acquitted of most charges, the group's practices and teachings continue to be subject of criticism and suspicion, such as the several failed end times predictions. They've stated that the world was going to end in 2002, 2006, 2007, 2008, and 2016 from nuclear war. The House of Yahweh remains active in Abilene, Texas, and continues to promote its teachings through various means, including its website, publications, and online presence. Alright, next up we have the Universe People, and this is a Czech-based UFO religion founded by Ivo A. Benda in the 1990s that combines elements of New Age spirituality, UFOlogy, and conspiracy theories, promoting a belief system that revolves around extraterrestrial beings, cosmic evolution, and spiritual enlightenment. The Universe People believe in existence of extraterrestrial civilizations, whom they refer to as cosmic people or space brothers. According to their teachings, these advanced beings have been guiding humanity's evolution and spiritual development for millennia. The Universe People believe that Earth is undergoing a period of transition leading to a new era of cosmic consciousness and unity among humans and extraterrestrials. They advocate for spiritual practices such as meditation, positive thinking, and living in harmony with nature to facilitate this transformation. The leader, Benda, a former electrician and self-proclaimed contactee, is considered to be the founder and spiritual leader of the Universe People, and he claims to have received messages from extraterrestrial beings since childhood, which form the basis of the group's teachings. He is revered by his followers as a messenger of cosmic truths and revealed by the Space Brothers. The Universe People have attracted followers primarily in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, although they have small international following as well. Followers of the group are individuals who are drawn towards alternative spirituality, UFO phenomena, and conspiracy theories, and often participate in group activities such as lectures, seminars, and retreats organized by the Universe People. They engage in various activities aimed at prompting their beliefs and teachings, including workshops and publications disseminating information about extraterrestrial contact, cosmic evolution, and spiritual awakening. And followers also participate in communal living arrangements and eco-villages designed to embody principles of cosmic harmony and sustainability. They have since faced criticism and skepticism from mainstream society, particularly for their unconventional beliefs and claims of extraterrestrial contact. In following the mass suicide of the cult Heaven's Gate in 1997, the Universe People attracted the attention of Czech media as a group with similar ideology and potential to commit similar acts. The Universe People, however, continue to operate and promote their beliefs in the Czech Republic and other parts of Europe, and while the group remains relatively small and obscure compared to more well-known religious movements, they maintain an active online presence through their website and social media channels. Alright, moving on to Tier 5. First off, we have Dignidad Colony. And Colonia Dignidad, also known as Dignidad Colony or Dignity Colony, was a secretive and highly authoritarian cult established in Chile by German immigrant Paul Schaefer in 1961. Initially presented as an agricultural commune, it evolved into a closed community with a dark history of human rights abuses, including child abuse, torture, and forced labor. Colonia Dignidad was reported to adhere to a blend of religious and political ideologies, drawing inspiration from Schaefer's interpretation of Christianity, mixed with extreme authoritarianism and elements of fascism. Schaefer proclaimed himself as a divine leader, demanding absolute obedience from his followers and instilling fear through manipulation and indoctrination, and the cult's beliefs and practices were kept largely secret from the world. The leader, Paul Schaefer, a former youth member and convicted pedophile, founded and led Colonia Dignidad. He wielded absolute power within the cult, controlling every aspect of his members' lives, including their beliefs, behavior, and access to information. He maintained a cult of personality around himself, portraying himself as a benevolent leader while ruthlessly enforcing his rule through fear and violence. The cult itself attracted a mix of German immigrants and Chilean nationals, many of whom were drawn to the promises of a utopian community away from social and political upheaval of post-World War II Europe and Chile. However, once inside the colony, members were subjected to strict control and isolation, making it difficult for them to leave or communicate with the outside world. Now, behind the facade of an agricultural commune, Colonia Dignidad engaged in various illicit activities, including child abuse, sexual exploitation, forced labor, and weapons manufacturing. Schaefer and his inner circle operated the colony as a paramilitary organization with its own intelligence service and heavily armed security forces, and the cult also maintained a network of underground bunkers and tunnels to evade detection by authorities. To the outside world, the colony portrayed itself as a prime example of German efficiency, cleanliness, and communal work, and the profitable agricultural production and attached charity hospital helped preserve this image for a long time. Before officially moving his organization to Chile, Paul Schaefer requested that the Chilean government exempt him from paying taxes and grant him asylum as long as he helped with gaining political intelligence. The MaelRadec Commission, under the leadership of military dictator Pinochet, Paul Schaefer would provide political intelligence against enemies of the state, and in underground prisons, captives would be tortured in numerous ways, including mutilation from dogs and electric shocks, and some torture victims alleged that Schaefer was directly involved in their torture. However, there is speculation on the extent of Schaefer's involvement with Pinochet at the time. And during this military dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet from 1973 to 1990, Colonia Dignidad served as a special torture center. It was concluded that a number of people apprehended under this dictatorship were held captive and were actually tortured in the tunnels of Colonia Dignidad and were interrogated to gain an understanding of their personality in order to gauge appropriate torture techniques. And as many as 100 of the citizens taken to Colonia Dignidad by the Chilean government were murdered at the colony. By this time, some defectors of the colony had portrayed it as a cult by which the leader Paul Schaefer held ultimate power and claimed that residents were never allowed to leave the colony and were segregated by gender. Television, telephones, and calendars were also banned, and sex was banned, with some residents forced to take drugs to reduce their desires. Severe discipline in the forms of beatings and torture was commonplace, and Schaefer insisted that the discipline was spiritually enriching. In 1996, Schaefer ended up fleeing child sex abuse charges in Chile, escaping arrest until 2005, and he would be convicted of child abuse together with 26 other cult members and sentenced to 20 years in prison in 2006. He would die of a heart ailment in 2010, by which this time Colonia Dignidad was officially dissolved. Alright, next up we have the Trinity Foundation. And the Trinity Foundation is not really a cult, but rather a Christian organization based in Dallas, Texas, focused on charitable work, ministry, and advocacy. Founded in 1972 by Ole Anthony, the Trinity Foundation operated as a non-profit organization dedicated to serving the homeless, addressing poverty, and promoting accountability within religious institutions. They adhere to mainstream Christian beliefs, emphasizing principles of compassion, justice, and service to others. While the organization does not espouse a specific doctrine stance, it is guided by Christian values and seeks to embody the teachings of Jesus Christ in its work. The founder, Ole Anthony, served as a leader until his death in 2009, and he was known for his outspoken advocacy against corruption and misconduct within the Christian church, often exposing scandals among evangelists and megachurch leaders. The Trinity Church engaged in a wide range of activities aimed at fulfilling the mission, including operating shelters for the homeless, providing meals and basic necessities to those in need, offering counseling and support services, and advocating for policy changes to address systemic issues of poverty and inequality. And while the Trinity Foundation itself is not considered controversial, its work often involves confronting powerful religious leaders and institutions accused of financial misconduct or abuse of power, which has led to conflicts and legal disputes with some prominent evangelists and megachurch pastors who have been the subject of the Trinity Foundation's investigations. Anthony would die in 2021, which marked a significant loss for the organization. However, the Trinity Foundation remains committed to its mission under the leadership of current staff and board of directors. Alright, next up we have the Alamo Christian Foundation, also known as the Tony Alamo Christian Ministries, which was a controversial religious group founded by Tony Alamo in the 1960s. They adhered to a fundamentalist interpretation of Christianity, emphasizing strict adherence to biblical teachings and prophecies. Tony Alamo would preach a message of salvation through faith in Jesus Christ and warned of an impending judgment and persecution for those who did not accept his teachings. The group also held apocalyptic beliefs, predicting the imminent return of Jesus Christ and the establishment of a kingdom ruled by God's chosen people. They attracted followers from various backgrounds, including individuals seeking spiritual guidance, community, and belonging. And many of the Alamo's followers were drawn to Tony's charismatic personality and persuasive preaching style. However, the group also targeted vulnerable individuals, including the homeless, drug addicts, and troubled youth whom they recruited through aggressive evangelism and outreach efforts. The foundation itself engaged in a range of activities aimed at promoting their beliefs and expanding the influence, including hosting worship services, Bible study sessions, evangelistic crusades led by Tony Alamo, and they also operated businesses businesses including a clothing factory and various retail outlets, which generated income to support its activities and fund the Alamo's lavish lifestyle. Susan Alamo, Tony Alamo's wife, would die of breast cancer in 1982, and in the reported belief that she would rise from the dead, her embalmed body was kept on display for 6 months before it was entombed in a heart-shaped marble mausoleum on the church property. And Tony Alamo would ultimately be arrested in 2009 on conviction of 10 counts of transporting minors as young as 9 years old across state lines for sex. He was sentenced to the maximum amount of time for his crimes, which was 175 years in prison, and he would die in custody in 2017. Alright, next up we have Los Narcos Satanitos, and this was led by a man named Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, who was a Cuban-American serial killer, drug dealer, and cult leader that led this infamous organization in Matamoros, Mexico. As an adult, Adolfo would move to Mexico City and met the men who were to become his followers. They began to run a profitable business, casting spells to bring good luck, which involved expensive ritual practices, ritual sacrifices of chickens, goats, snakes, zebras, and even lion cubs. Many of his clients were rich drug dealers and hitmen who enjoyed the violence of Adolfo's magical displays. He also attracted other rich members of Mexican society, including several high-ranking corrupt policemen who introduced him to the city's powerful drug cartels, and his cult was said to be associated with the notable Gulf Cartel. It wasn't long before Adolfo would start to raid graveyards for human bones to put in his cauldron for spells, and before long, his cult decided that the spirits of the dead resided in the cauldron would be stronger with live human sacrifices instead of old bones. This resulted in them killing more than 20 victims, whose bodies were mutilated and found around Mexico City, and the process escalated until Adolfo eventually decided that the gang needed the power of a brain from an American student, culminating with the 1989 murder of Mark Kilroy. Adolfo began to believe that his magic was responsible for the success of the cartels and demanded to become a full business partner with one of the most powerful families he knew, Calzadas. When his demand was rejected, 7 family members disappeared and their bodies turned up with fingers, toes, ears, brains, and spines missing. He soon made friends with a new cartel, the Hernandez brothers, and he also took up with a young woman named Sarah Aldrete, who became the high priestess of the cult. He would move to Rancho Santa Elena in 1998, where he carried out more sadistic ritual murders, sometimes of strangers and other times of rival drug dealers, and also used the ranch that he lived on to store huge shipments of cocaine and marijuana. In 1989, his henchmen would abduct a pre-med student, Mark Kilroy, from outside a Mexican bar and took him to the ranch. Kilroy was a U.S. citizen who had been in Mexico on spring break, and when he was brought to the ranch, he was murdered. Police quickly discovered that the cult was responsible for Kilroy's death as he sought a good and superior brain for one of his ritual spells, and officers raided the ranch and discovered his cauldron containing various items such as a dead black cat and a human brain. 15 mutilated corpses were dug up on the ranch, one of them being Kilroy's, and eventually Adolfo would flee Mexico City with 4 of his followers. They were only discovered when the police were called to the apartment they were staying in because of an unrelated dispute taking place there, and as officers approached, Adolfo would open fire on them with a machine gun, leading to reinforcements being brought in. Determined not to go to prison, he ordered a follower to kill him and Martin Quintana, and by the time the police reached the apartment, Adolfo and Martin were dead, and 2 members, including his wife, were arrested. A total of 14 cult members were charged with a range of crimes from murder and drug running to obstructing the court of justice. The members were convicted of multiple murders and were ordered to serve prison sentences of over 40 years each, thus leading to the dissolvement of this cult. Alright, next up we have the Soldiers of Heaven, and this was a cult based in Iraq that gained international attention after a violent confrontation with Iraqi security forces in 2007. The Soldiers of Heaven believed that the Mahdi, a prophesied redeemer figure in Islam, would soon appear to establish justice and righteousness on earth. They interpreted certain Islamic texts and prophecies to predict the Mahdi's imminent arrival and saw themselves as his vanguard or army, tasked with preparing the way for his coming. And their beliefs also included a strong opposition to perceived corruption and oppression within the Iraqi government, and a desire to establish an Islamic state based on their interpretations of Sharia law. The group was led by a charismatic figure named Ahmad Hassan al-Yamani, also known as Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who claimed to be the Mahdi, or his representative, and wielded considerable influence over his followers. Al-Yamani's leadership style was authoritarian. They attracted followers from marginalized and disenfranchised communities in Iraq, particularly among Shiite Muslims who felt marginalized by the Sunni-dominated government. Many of their followers were drawn to the group's promises of justice, redemption, and the fulfillment of Islamic prophecy. They would engage in various activities aimed at preparing the Mahdi's return and challenging the authority of the Iraqi government, and reportedly stockpiled weapons and ammunition, conducted military training exercises, and established fortified compounds in remote areas of southern Iraq, and also clashed with rival Shiite militias and Iraqi security forces, leading to several violent confrontations. The Soldiers of Heaven would come under international attention in January of 2007 when they launched a brazen attack on Iraqi security forces near the holy city of Najaf. The group apparently fought a bizarre battle with Iraqi and U.S. forces, where it was alleged that about 200 to 300 of their members were killed, including its leader, and 300 to 400 were captured. After the battle, Iraqi police rounded up hundreds of SEC members and put them on trial, and in September of 2007, the criminal court passed judgment on 458 accused. 10 leaders of the Soldiers of Heaven were sentenced to death, 54 members were released, and the rest were sentenced to jail terms ranging from 15 years to life. Thus, the violent confrontation with Iraqi security forces effectively ended the Soldiers of Heaven as a significant force, and they are no longer considered a significant threat in Iraq. Alright, next up we have the Alen boarding school, or often referred to simply as Alen. It was not really a cult in traditional sense, but rather a controversial residential behavior modification facility located in Poland, Maine, USA, founded by Joseph Ricci in 1970. Now, this school did not have a specific set of religious or spiritual beliefs, and instead it operated under the premise of providing therapeutic treatment for troubled adolescents, including those with behavioral issues, substance abuse problems, or emotional difficulties. The underlying philosophy of the program was based on behavior modification techniques aimed at breaking down negative behaviors and attitudes through confrontational therapy and peer pressure. Joseph was the founder and director of the Alen School, and he was known for his authoritarian leadership style and unorthodox therapeutic methods, which included group confrontations, public humiliation, and physical punishment. He exerted complete control over the daily operations of the school and was the driving force behind his controversial practices. The Alen School was subject of numerous controversies and allegations of abuse throughout its existence, and former students and staff members accused the school of physical and emotional abuse, neglect, and violations of human rights. Reports of students being subject to beatings, isolation, and forced participation in humiliating rituals prompted investigations by state authorities and calls for the school's closure. There were multiple deaths and abuse cases related to the Alen School, including certain situations in which students had run away from the school, thus resulting in their murders by random strangers, suicide, and even a fighting ring in which students were forced to fight each other as means of behavior modification. Joseph would head the school until his death in 2001, when his widow Sharon Terry would take over, and by 2011, it was announced that the Alen School would be closing, and the school's owner, Sharon Terry, blamed the closing on declining enrollment and resulting financial difficulties, as well as negative attacks on the school via the internet. But yeah, the property was sold and facilities were repurposed for other uses. Alright, we're moving on to Tier 6. Oh yeah, woo-hoo. And first off, we have the Kidwelly sex cult. And this was a cult that operated in the Welsh town of Kidwelly that raped children for decades, until its perpetrators were arrested in 2010. Known by its members as simply the Church, its leader, Colin Bately, psychologically terrorized and coerced vulnerable children into performing sexual acts using death threats and brainwashing. Now, the cult sexually exploited vulnerable teenagers using occult practices and literature as means of justifying its abuse. It was led by Colin Bately and his wife, as well as 3 other women, and its sexual abuse against children spanned several decades and was first carried out in London and then in Kidwelly in southeast Wales. The cult would target troubled, impressionable minors, forcing them to undergo an initiation ceremony that ended with sex with an adult, and children were intimidated into participating with threats of murder. One girl testified that after this ceremony, she was regularly coerced into having sex with Colin Bately at his house, and with strangers at satanic orgies. The sexual abuse was often preceded with satanic ceremonies, in which passages from the occultist Aleister Crowley's books, the Book of Law, the Book of Magic, and Equinox of the Gods were read out, and at the end of these satanic ceremonies, members became skyclad, meaning they disrobed and had sex. Colin Bailey's own son would even die on February 2008 when he accidentally hanged himself during a sex act. He filmed the whole fatal accident on his mobile phone, and an inquest was told that he was found naked and hanging. Eventually in 2010, 2 adult victims, one male and female, reported the cult's abuse to the police, prompting the group's arrest that same year. The cult's leader, Colin Bailey, 3 females, and a second man received prison sentences totaling 36 years, with the possibility of Colin Bailey remaining in prison for life, and they were found guilty on 47 charges including rape and other sexual crimes against children after a 5-week trial in 2011, and the cult has then since been disbanded. Alright, next up we have Lev Tahor, which translates to pure heart and is an ultra-Orthodox Jewish sect that gained notoriety for its strict religious practices, controversial beliefs, and allegations of child abuse and neglect. They adhere to an extreme interpretation of Orthodox Judaism, emphasizing strict adherence to Jewish law and separation from secular influences. The group rejects modern technology, education, and cultural norms, advocating for a lifestyle that revolves around religious observance and spiritual purity. And they also believe in the imminent arrival of the Messiah and the establishment of a utopian society governed by Jewish law. It was founded by Shlomo Helbrenz, who is a controversial figure known for his charismatic leadership style and authoritarian control over his followers, and he claimed to have special insights into Jewish law and prophecy, which he used to justify the group's strict rules and practices. They attracted followers mainly from the Orthodox Jewish community, including individuals seeking a more puritanical approach to religious observance, and many of the group's members were also drawn to the promise of spiritual purity and communal living away from the perceived moral corruption of secular society. Now, the group's activity has been subject to controversy and scrutiny, particularly regarding allegations of child abuse, forced marriage, and neglect. In 2011, the group would come into conflict with the local school board, which took issue with the fact that children of the group had not been registered to local schools, and the children were not educated in accordance with the curriculum required by Quebec law. In April of 2013, the group developed a contingency plan in the event that the authorities would initiate action and seek to apprehend the children. When child services workers began investigating, they discovered houses were dirty, had 4 to 5 children sleeping in one bedroom, some mattresses soaked in urine, and children with fungus on their feet, thus leading to weekly visits, and eventually the issue of search warrants in relation to allegations that members of the sect inflicted psychological and physical abuse on teenage girls. Eventually, a Quebec court ruled that 14 of the children must be placed in foster care, and arrangements were made for the children to be placed in Yiddish-speaking foster homes. And on March of 2014, about 15 members of the group took flight to Guatemala, and a group of 9 people were intercepted at Trinidad and Tobago. Most of the members were arrested in April of 2014, leading to 3 of them being deported to their native home in Israel, and the leader would be found in 2017, drowned in a river in the Mexican state of Chiapas. And it was believed that he committed suicide, as evidence of his abuse became more evident and were close to being published. Alright, next up we have Educo, and this was ran by a man named Tony Quinn, who is an Irish businessman, yoga entrepreneur, mind coach, and cult leader who founded the Educo cult. He had become well known in Ireland as a hypnotherapist and a mind trainer, as well as being a fitness expert and business guru. He held a seminar in 1994 in which he revealed his thoughts and purposes and how he felt his purpose could be to work with millions of people. He stated that he required followers to submit totally to him and not to resist, and he also talked about being able to determine the thoughts you have, likening them to computer programs that together form a personality that is not yourself. He attracted followers from various backgrounds, including individuals seeking to overcome personal challenges, improve performance in sports or business, and enhance their overall quality of life. Educo offered a range of services and products aimed at helping individuals achieve their goals and fulfill their potential, including seminars, workshops, retreats, and personalized coaching programs focused on topics such as self-improvement, personal development, health and wellness, and success in business or sports. They faced mass criticism and controversy over the years, particularly regarding its promotional tactics, high fees, and claims of miraculous results, ultimately being labeled as a pyramid scheme. Some former participants have accused the program of being manipulative, deceptive, and exploitative, alleging that it preys on vulnerable individuals seeking quick fixes or solutions to their problems. Additionally, Tony Quinn himself had been involved in legal disputes and regulatory investigations related to his business practices and the marketing of his products and services. However, Educo continues to operate, offering its programs and services to individuals seeking personal development and self-improvement. And while it maintains a presence in several countries, including Ireland, the United Kingdom, and the United States, its popularity and influence appear to have diminished in recent years. Alright, next up we have Giant Testicle Sex Cult of Seattle, and basically this is all related to a man who died after filling his testicles with silicone as part of a cult sex game. The man, Jack Chapman, died in Seattle after injecting a large amount of fluid into his private parts, and his death certificate was listed as silicone injection syndrome. Further investigation showed that he was part of a homoerotic master-slave relationship in the San Francisco gay community before moving to another in Seattle. He then met popular community blogger Dylan Havertopen, who played the master role to members of this BDSM group. He introduced Mr. Chapman to his extreme fetish of body manipulation and master-servant roleplay, and Linda Chapman, Jack's mother, would find the contract that set out the full terms of Jack's relationship with Dylan. It indicated that Dylan was the master, and Jack was one of a number of, quote, pups who had to obey him. The pup's body and mind were also said to be exclusive property of the master, while the pup had no identity other than that given to him by the master. Jack Chapman was forced to take Dylan's surname, sign over his salary, and cut off contact with anyone outside the group, and also wear a chain around his neck. And 3 weeks before his death, Jack signed a will, leaving all his assets to Dylan. Dylan had claimed that Jack had died from diagnosed lung disease on Facebook, but his mother Linda knows this to be untrue. Dylan denies forcing Jack to inject himself with silicone, and Mrs. Chapman still hopes to get closure with the help of the police. Alright, moving on to our final tier, tier 7, and this one is a bit absurd. It's kind of a jokey jokes. First off, we have icebergcharts.com, and this is actually where I got this iceberg chart. And I guess you could call it a cult. Ooh, spooky. I don't know. It's pretty interesting. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of interesting stuff you can learn. It's just basically a website of rabbit holes, to be honest. Alright, next up we have Happyism, and this is the form of religion in the game called Earthbound. And a cult in nature, it was established by Carpenter, a character and boss in the game, and up until the early game, they possessed their own village in peaceful Rest Valley, and the cult worships the color blue, as evidenced by their mission to paint everything in the world blue. And their chanting of blue, blue, blue several times a day and once before their bedtime. And after Carpenter is defeated, he disbands the cult. Alright, next up we have the Goofy Goober Alien Death Cult Theory, and yeah, this guy made a conspiracy theory video about SpongeBob. Go check it out. And finally we have SGI, and SGI is a Buddhist movement that originated in Japan in the 1930s. They follow the teachings of the Nichiren Buddhism, which emphasized the Lotus Sutra as the ultimate expression of Buddhist truth. SGI members believe in the power of chanting the mantra Nam Myoho Renge Kyo as it means to attain enlightenment and overcome life's challenges. The movement promotes values of compassion, tolerance, and the interconnectedness of all life. They don't have a central figure or guru to follow, and they instead operate as a decentralized organization with members participating in local chapters and study groups. They have millions of members worldwide, spanning diverse cultures and backgrounds, and the movement appeals to individuals seeking spiritual fulfillment, personal growth, and a sense of community. And the members often participate in regular group chanting sessions, study meetings, and community service activities aimed at promoting peace and happiness. They have, however, faced criticism and controversy throughout the years, particularly regarding its organizational structures, fundraising practice, and allegations of cult-like behavior. Some former members have accused the movement of exerting undue influence over its followers, promoting a cult of personality around its leaders, and pressuring members to donate money or recruit new members. However, SGI has vigorously denied these allegations and maintains that it operates a legitimate religious organization dedicated to promoting peace and human dignity. It has since entered a coalition agreement with the Liberal Democratic Party in 1999, which is a major conservative and Japanese nationalist political party in Japan, and is currently a junior partner in the government, with a following of over 11 million people. They continue to operate as a global Buddhist movement in over 190 countries and territories, and the movement remains active in promoting its message of peace, cultural exchange, and personal empowerment through its various activities and initiatives. And yeah, that's it. That's all we've got for this iceberg, man. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Cults are bad, bro. Please stay away from them. I love you, bro. You don't need you will never need a fucking cult, bro. You never need that shit to... Actually, let me be quiet before they fucking kill my dumbass. Hope you guys enjoyed the video again, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.